Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Another wonderful afternoon here in sunny Florida. It's really hot outside today, and you can see the sunshine coming in through my living room here. And yeah, it's just a beautiful day, man. Um, and we're gonna have a great show today. We're gonna have a panel discussion on free will versus determinism. Does morality even exist? So it's gonna get very interesting. Um, it's going to be a really good thing. Matter of fact, to kind of start things off, I was kind of heard about something that had happened recently, and this is kind of like kind of touches on free will. Got me thinking. The other day, a bus of ugly people had a head-on collision with a truck, right? And what happened is when they died, God granted them one wish. The first person said, "Hey, I want to be gorgeous." So God snapped his fingers and it happened. The second person had said the same thing. He was ugly too and he wanted to change that situation. And God did the same thing. He snapped his finger. He's a beautiful person. This went on and on throughout the group. God noticed the last man in line was actually laughing hysterically. So by the time God got to the last 10 people, the last man was laughing and rolling on the ground. So when it was his turn, God said, "Well, why are you laughing and what is it that you want?" And he goes, "I wish all those guys were ugly again." God snapped his finger. I know, stupid dad joke. Anyways, we're going to get down to business. Just want to kind of break the ice a little bit. But yeah, so we're talking about free will. So I guess first of all, what I want to do is kind of lay out the way I understand free will. Like, what is it? So the one point I want to make, and hopefully all the folks that come on to the panel will be able to distinguish what we mean by these terminologies, right? So there's free will, there's libertarian free will, and then there's compatibilism, right? So there's different flavors of free will: libertarian free will and compatibilism. Now, libertarian free will means free from any causal chain. That means the will of human intention has nothing that can limit it aside from one's own choice to do otherwise. So there's no such thing as some sort of causal chain that will, determine how a person chooses, right? At all. That's libertarian free will. Compatibilism, on the other hand, is the position that causal determinism is true, but we still act as though we're free, moral, responsible agents when, in the absence of external constraints, our actions are caused by our desires or our wants. So, compatibilism is kind of like the thesis that free will is actually compatible with determinism in the sense that you're able to do what you want to do. You're always free to do that. In fact, you're kind of determined to do that. And you're morally responsible because you also have the right to act on information. As you get older, as time goes on, you're able to build habits, form different, habits. And you behave that way and you kind of like figure out, hey, this information says, if I do such and such, if I do X, I'm going to die. Whereas if I do Y, I'll stand a better chance in living. And so here you are, you've got these two different choices to make. Which one are you going to do? Well, you're going to freely choose to live if that's what you always wanted. You may choose to die. If that's what you wanted to do, then that sort of determines what you're free to do. That's compatibilism in a nutshell. Then we have determinism. So generally, determinism is the doctrine that all events, including human actions, are ultimately determined by causes external to the will. So some philosophers has taken determinism to imply that individual human beings have no free will at all and cannot be held morally responsible for their actions unless you're a compatibilist, right? For example, where and when you were born, genetic predisposition, and your inherent desires, whether that comes from the environment, like where you were raised, and so on and so on. That's determinism. So, questions that determinists would challenge the free will proponents with may include stuff like, well, hey, if you've got free will, then can you choose your next thought? Can you choose to stop your normal body functions like hunger or death, or you have to pee? Can you stop that just by your willing it? If you can't, then your will is limited and therefore not free. You can't be a little bit pregnant. So you can't be a little bit free. You're either free or you're not. That's how they would reason on that. So questions that come from the other camp might be, well, many in the free will camp will hold on to free will by denying that causal chains are imposing any restriction on the will at all. Well, how? Well, they may say that while we can't choose to fly by flapping our arms like a bird, we can still choose to accept this fact and still come up with inventions like the airplane, for example. We not be able to will away pain, but we can choose to manage our pain or come up with medical solutions or technology. But without free will, we can't choose any of these options, and we would just be mindless robots, right? Well, me myself, I'm a compatibilist. So what I think is that we have a form of free will, which is to behave according to wants and desires. I therefore acknowledge that my desires are like formed by a combination of things. I'd say things I have no control over, like the time and place of my birth, my culture, my genetic predispositions. However, I can choose to act within these constraints as a free agent, in the sense that I can behave in a way that navigates that determined terrain. Now, I believe that my values and moral acts are all chosen because of those wants and feelings about those things, whatever it may be. And these are the results of my wants and desires, which are the result of my genetics or my environment, which is the result of when and where I was born, which was the result of where and when my parents chose to have sex when I was, born or became an embryo in my mom's tummy, which was caused by their sexual desires, which was caused by evolution, which was caused by everything that preceded that set of events. So you get the idea. You can trace this stuff all the way back to some cause that logically led to some behavior or act or decision. So we have some Christians that are going to join us, Christians and theists as well, like not Christians, but we'll have different guests on, and atheists, skeptics. Question is Christianity consistent with libertarian style free will? Personally, I don't think so. Like Adam and Eve didn't decide to be born before they were born, right? The human family inherited sin and death according to the story, and they have no willpower against inherited sin. That is until Jesus was sent to allow this, ability to opt out of the ultimate wages of sin, which is death, right? But your body still dies and you can't stop that. So you don't have freedom over that. God was not free according to the Bible. God simply wanted to create. So this makes God in bondage to his desire to create things. God is all-knowing. So this quality sort of entails determinism. You see, if God knows that he will change his mind about something in the future because he's omniscient, then he knew he was going to not judge Israel, for example. He might turn his back from his anger. He might decide to forgive. Then God would have never changed his mind at all, actually, because he would have known that he was going to change his mind in the future since he's omniscient. So it seems that God doesn't even have free will according to Christianity. But without free will, then where is the justification for judgment? It would seem that God was acting arbitrarily, and any judgment would be opposite. It would be injustice, because you created these people as sinners or determined to be sinners at some point in history, and then you punished them for it. No one chose to do that, right? Except God. And then God chose to do that because of his almighty nature, which God didn't choose. That's just who he is. He's determined by his nature. God has a nature, according to the Bible. He's all knowing, all powerful, things of that nature. So those are some of the questions people can present to Christians if they believe in free will. Not all Christians believe that way, of course, and we may talk to some folks who agree with me that actually many Christians understand the Bible and understand this whole situation, right? But what I want to do is also talk about, what do experts in the area of psychology say, right? Like, what does science have to say on it? I've got a few videos I'm going to pull up here in a minute before we bring our guest on, just to kind of set things up and take a look at stuff. Like in psychology, they talk about free will, but it's mostly viewed in the sense of it being an illusion, given that our conscious mind is mostly a reactionary part of our mind, and that the impulse of action precedes the thought of the action. Any idea of free will is just an illusion created by our conscious mind to explain the action we take. We're storytellers. Also, even if free will was not an illusion, given all of our supposed choices and decisions are directly influenced by the world around us, from parents to society, then in effect, we would never actually have true will anyways. You know, just the logic of it is, it's kind of like a square circle in this case. So it certainly appears, and is mostly accepted within psychology, that free will is subject to determinism. And I know a lot of people will disagree, because people actually really do want to feel like they can hold themselves accountable, hold other people's accountable. And you can under compatibilism, because we can change our behaviors and attitudes over time. Now, if we look at stuff in a real, if we isolate things in a real short time down to the molecular level, we have billiard balls hitting each other, neurons firing. In that sense, you have no free will. You just see all these things happening. And yes, a no-brainer. You're following the laws of physics in your brain, and the consciousness emerges from that process. But then we have the idea, like I said, of compatibilism, where we can actually work within that framework or those constraints. You know what I mean? So anyways, I don't want to just say these things and make people think I'm making the stuff up or pulling out of my ass. What do scientists, physicists, psychologists, what do all these people who study this stuff actually say about it? So I kind of wanted to share a few videos really quick before we let our guests on, and when the show gets really juicy. So let's check this out real quick. This is going to be my girl here, Sabine Hossenfelder. She's a German physicist, kind of popular as a public discourse person for physics. So this is what she has to say about free will.
Free will is often described as the possibility that one could have done otherwise. But this description stopped being useful with quantum mechanics, because it did mean that single particles also have free will. If you take, for example, a photon, a single quantum of light, and you send it through a beam splitter, then there's a 50% chance the photon goes left and 50% chance that the photon goes right. If you measure the photon on the left, you can say, well, it could have done otherwise. It could have gone right? Does that mean it has free will? Well, I'd say that's not what normal people would call free will, though some physicists actually believe that photons are observers. One of the consequences of that is that they've concluded reality doesn't exist. I've talked about this in an earlier video. This is also what happens in the free will theorem. This theorem was mathematically proved by John Conway and Simon Cohen in 2006. It says that if humans have free will, then elementary particles also have free will. But the statement of the theorem is logically equivalent to the statement, if particles do not have free will, then neither have humans. I don't know about you, but to me it seems reasonable to assume that particles do not have free will. And either way you put it, the free will theorem says nothing about the existence of free will in the first place. So let's return to the question of what we mean by free will. We've seen that the idea that you could have done otherwise or that your actions were not determined is not descriptive because of this random element from quantum mechanics. Contemporary philosophers have therefore tried to capture the essence of free will in the idea that human decisions are to a large extent independent from external factors and instead dominantly driven by internal deliberation. Different philosophers have put somewhat different spins on this story, but it always comes down to the idea that human decisions are difficult, if not impossible, to predict from external input and observations alone. The philosopher Daniel Dennett, for example, captures the essence of free will in our ability to see probable futures that seem like they're going to happen, and then the possibility to take steps that something else happens instead, like, for example, an autonomous vehicle does. The philosopher Janan Ismail has even written a book called How Physics Makes Us Free. She basically says that free will lies in the large degree of autonomy that our brain has from environmental factors as it operates. Those are typical examples of what's called compatibilism. That's the philosophy that free will is compatible with the laws of nature as they are, a mixture of determinism and indeterminism. Most contemporary philosophers are compatibilists. According to a 2020 survey, almost 60%. But it's not like this is a new idea. Well-known philosophers like David Hume and John Stuart Mill were compatibilists. The other big camp is that of libertarianism, whose supporters also believe in free will. Their philosophy comes in several variants. First, there are those who insist that the randomness of quantum mechanics makes place for free will. As I said, I don't see how this makes sense. Then there are those who acknowledge that an element of indeterminism doesn't entail free will, but who then throw out some established signs to make place for miracles, like, for example, the ability to change your past by your thoughts. And then there are those who just insist that free will exists, but it's non-physical. The latter is a well-trodden road. For example, René Descartes and Immanuel Kant were both in that camp. I'd say the idea is not wrong, but I never understood the point, because if free will is not physical, it doesn't explain anything in the physical world, so why bother inventing it? I am in neither of those camps. The science writer John Horgan once called me a free will denier, but I think this is a misunderstanding. It's not that I'm denying people feel like they have free will, but I'm with libertarians in that I think free will is incompatible with determinism. I also think it's incompatible with indeterminism. And since the real world is governed by a mixture of determinism and indeterminism, I arrive at the conclusion that free will doesn't exist. It's sometimes called hard incompatibilism. The good thing about hard incompatibilism is that you don't need to explain what free will is in any detail. You just need to say, whatever it is incompatible with what we know about the laws of nature. That said, I don't have a problem with compatibilism. If you want to define whatever as free will, please go ahead.
Thank you, Sabina, for that support. So here's another thing I want to throw on top of that. They've actually done some experiments to test free will, right? Not talking about necessarily the Libet experiment, because the Libet experiment, I think, had some flaws in the way that they set that up. I'll just go ahead and admit that. I'm not one of these guys that, is going to fight and die on that hill, because I think that people who are for free will, when they criticize the Libet experiment, they kind of do have a good point, and I really haven't been able to, you know, fight that. So I'll give that to them. The Libet experiment failed, but I think it failed not because libertarian free will actually exists. It failed because the way they set the thing up was all messed up. It didn't involve so many other factors, as a lot of critics will point out. So, but there are these other experiments that kind of work off the idea of the Libet experiment, and it's very interesting. So I wanted to kind of bring that up too, and let you see how that goes. Really interesting stuff. One of my favorites, Alan Alda. I love Alan Alda, man, and I miss him a lot. But he was a really cool guy. Anyways, he did a show about 10 years ago about, do humans really have free will? And it was really interesting, and it proves the point through an experiment that's repeatable, testable, and all of that. So they did science to kind of figure out what's going on. So check that out.
Feeling that I've come to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire to find out if I have free will, if I'm truly the master of my brain.
I'm just going to slide this on.
I'm being fitted out to be the subject of a famous experiment.
This has little ear flaps. I like that. I love these ear flaps on it.
First performed by a psychologist named Benjamin Libet some 30 years ago, the experiment has been interpreted by some to mean that our brains make decisions before we're aware of making them.
I think we have this intuition that at every moment we're consciously figuring things out and consciously deciding things. And actually, I mean, if you just take conversation, all the words that are spilling out of my mouth, I'm not choosing each one. I don't choose whether to say often instead of frequently. It's my brain has decided these things and made my mouth move in a certain way. And all of this is happening without my conscious input.
I noticed a long time ago that I couldn't pay attention. Not only didn't I, but I couldn't pay attention to every motion I made going down a flight of stairs.
Right.
I had to let my body know more than I did consciously, because I wouldn't make it down the stairs otherwise.
Right. Right. And if you turn your conscious attention to it, it screws it up.
Yeah.
The electrodes will pick up from my scalp the minute electrical activity in my brain as it readies itself to move my finger. Meanwhile, my job is to stare at this clock.
You're going to allow it to do one full rotation. And then any time after that, it doesn't have to be in the next rotation, could be 5 rotations later, whatever you want. Anytime after that first rotation, I want you to press a button. And I want you to do it spontaneously, and you're just making a voluntary movement. Press the button. The reason why there's a clock on the screen is you're going to note the moment that you first prepared the movement, when you first had that inkling that you were going to move.
Prepared the movement?
This is the tricky part about the experiment. You're just going to try to figure out when you first knew you were going to move. When you first knew, now's the moment. But we can't allow you just to say now, because that formulating that word takes time, right? So we're going to have you instead just note on the clock when you think that moment first happened.
I have to make a decision to hit the button.
That's right.
And when
you want it to be spontaneous. You don't want it to be planned. You don't want to think, okay, when it gets to 10, I'm going to hit the button. None of that. You just want to now, spontaneous.
Okay, so staring at the clock, and now, as near as I could tell, I decided when the clock was at 6. Okay, again. Now. I think that was at 2. This went on for about 15 minutes. Decide, hit the key, and then judge as well as I could just when I had decided.
Experiment finished. Now what?
Now we're going to go look at your data.
Oh, take a look at my head.
See what your brain's doing.
Can I get this hat off?
Before looking at my data, Talia showed me the result from averaging a bunch of other people's responses.
This gray line is indicating when someone's made a movement. That's the movement line. And then what you see here on the x-axis are all the time points before in seconds. So here you've got 2.5 seconds before you make the movement. You see this ramping up of neural activity associated with the movement. And then what W is here is that very first moment that you have the conscious inkling that you're about to make that movement. So what we see here is that W happens just right before the movement. And what thousands of years of discussion with philosophers have been is just to look at this part of the graph, because this is all we have access to in our consciousness is I had the thought and then I made the act. What we're missing, of course, and what science gives us now by looking inside the head is what all this activity is doing ahead of time.
Before you're even conscious that you're about to do something.
That's right.
Before you're aware that you're making a decision,
Your brain has
your
already
is already
galvanized.
in motion.
Yes.
Preparing
Exactly the
preparing your
motor
finger
command.
to hit, right?
Right.
Now this is very weird, right? The electrodes on the subject's scalp pick up the brain's planning to move the finger a full 2.5 seconds before the person thinks he's decided to move it.
Okay, and Alan, here's your data.
And things were about to get even weirder. My brain was ramping up about a second before I decided to hit the button, not the 2.5 seconds of most people's brains. And bizarrely, I hit the key at almost the exact same instant I decided to hit the key, not after a few milliseconds like most people. I think this shows that I'm very spontaneous.
Yes.
Yes, you're a very
Yes.
good
Yeah.
subject.
I'm not crazy, I'm spontaneous.
Spontaneous.
And I'm aware I decide to do something as I do it. And it's just like
Right. You're a free spirit.
free. That's it. That's it. Okay. Well, thanks. I really appreciate you showing me this
Sure thing.
and the world.
It tells us that our intuitions about free will are probably sort of folk theories and not really based on how the brain works.
Now, the idea that our brains are doing stuff in anticipation of decisions we haven't made yet or don't think we've made yet has been interpreted as meaning we don't have free will, or at least free will as we think of it.
The subjective experience that we have of being in the moment, of deciding, of choosing at that very moment, and we could have chosen completely differently, is it doesn't line up with what we know about how the brain works. That is not everything that goes into it, because you saw the graph where there's all of this brain activity that precedes that moment, that decides.
So I want to pause this because I don't want to get shut down off YouTube. Can't play it for too long before they shut me down. So just a little commentary before we continue. So just to recap, it looks like there's some brain activity that happens a few seconds before a decision is actually made or you're conscious of the decision, but your brain is already making that decision before you actually act on it. So there's some unconscious processing involved in making these sort of decisions. Anyways, just wanted to do a quick recap. Then after this, we're going to bring our guests on and we're going to have this discussion.
What that moment
And
is
I'm
going to look
aware
like.
of the moment of decision,
But that's
I'm
it.
not aware of all the activity that precedes it.
But
Isn't
we
it
have
too
to look-
late to do anything about it? When you say,
Yes.
now I'm going to do it, could you also say, no, I'm not going to do it?
No, because that would require what people call a ghost in the machine, or some additional part that isn't a physical process, that's a man pulling levers and deciding, no, I'm not going to do what my neurons are telling me to do. And science is just about that.
Yeah,
that
but wait a
notion.
minute. Last night in the hotel room,
Okay.
there were 2 pieces of chocolate on the bed,
Yeah.
on the pillow.
Uh-huh.
So I had one, and I said, that's all I'm going to have.
Okay.
And then I was in the other room, and I had this really strong urge to go back to the pillow and take the other piece
Right.
of chocolate. And I said, what the heck? Here I go. No, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
Well, I was already getting out of the chair in my brain, according
Yes.
to this test.
Yes.
And I was on the way and
Yes.
aware of that when I said, what the heck? But then I said, no.
Yeah.
So,
And that was coming out of somewhere too. That was coming out of an unconscious place. You were, at the same time that your parts of your impulsive system are galvanizing you towards the chocolate, there's other parts of your brain that are running simulations like, no, the long-term health consequences, and that won in the end. That one won.
there's just a
Yeah.
whole lot of stuff going
Yeah.
on unconsciously. Even the reasoning is going on unconsciously.
That's right.
Yeah, so that kind of makes sense to me. So we have this, we don't identify with our neurons. We don't identify with the unconscious processing because we're not aware of that part that's going on in our brain. It's the same thing with any other part of our body, like our liver function, our blood, our digestive system. Like all of this stuff goes on unconsciously in the background. We're not necessarily aware of it. And thank goodness for that, right? Thank science for that. because if it did, imagine how much stuff you got to keep track of, but nature has given us this ability to let this stuff happen without our conscious focus, because that would really bog us down. That's why we're like, when we ride a bicycle and we learn, it becomes habit. It becomes you don't even have to think about it, and you're riding that bike. Anyways, I'm gonna let the panel on. I'm gonna bring them one at a time and introduce them. First up is my man Alejandro, who's a big supporter of the show. We had really nice, cool conversations and stuff like that, and so he's always jumping in, got some real cool ideas and alternative views. So I love to, go over those. And he's a Zoroastrian, so he's a theist, not a Christian, but he's a theist. So he has his own view, though, about free will. Then we've got Logan, my man Logan, also another big supporter of the show. What's going on, my buddy?
Not much.
Good to see you here, man. And you are an atheist, right? Skeptic, atheist. You're in that camp, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. So I just want to make sure I don't mislabel you. And then we've got my man Logan here. What's going on, Logan? I haven't seen you in a while, buddy. How you been?
I'm doing good. How are you, bro?
I'm doing it, man. I'm doing it. And you are a Christian, and that's how you would identify. Is that correct? I just want to make sure I'm not misidentifying.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Maybe like an unorthodox Christian. And
Okay.
I didn't realize you were gonna have another guy named Logan, so you could just call me Logue for the sake of the podcast.
Exactly right.
Well, Scott, for the audience, how would you label yourself?
I would be a skeptic. I'm a naturalistic pantheist for right now, meaning when it comes to the God topic, I tend to view that as the laws of nature or some transcendent force outside of, some of the things that, including some of the things we see in nature, but obviously we don't know everything. So there's other things going on I'm not aware of. And I'm willing to call that God. I'm willing to call that, nature. If you want to use that label, that's fine. So I would identify as a naturalistic pantheist in that view. I'm also agnostic. So while I look at pantheism as kind of an identifier in these sort of discussions, I'm always open. I'm always open to see other views and things like that. So I don't die on any hill. Anyways, that's just me. So anyways, we're going to start off. What do you guys think about the information I provided? Because I know that anybody can say anything. Like, I can get on here and say, no, there's no free will, or yeah, there's free will, there's libertarian free will or whatever. I've just presented what the scientific data is, and that's really all I can go off of. I mean, there's philosophy like moral realism, and I think most philosophers are moral realists. And so, but most philosophers also deny free will. So I'm not sure how that works. But anyways, I wanted to kind of see what your guys' view. I'll start off with Alejandro. I know we've had this conversation in the past. What does that information mean to you when you see stuff like that?
It means they're not very good philosophers. Okay, so I'm going to depart from my usual style, so to speak, and go backwards a bit to when I was a college student. And with my very first philosophy professor, William Carter Sims, who was an atheist and was brilliant. And I spent a lot of time with him, and he recognized the problem long before anyone else. And I remember in his office hours, he said, once upon a time, if it came down to a choice between reason and faith, you chose faith. And now we're at an age where if it comes to a choice between reason and free will, you choose free will. He recognized it was that important a concept, because without free will, you don't have logic, you don't have discretion, you don't have moral culpability. Just basically everything just goes kaplooey. And that is the world we live in. The world we live in is one of moral relativism, where everyone everyone's decisions are supposed to be validated. If you decide, yeah, I am really a 6-year-old girl, you're determined to do that. You have absolutely no control. That's just reality that you believe that, and nothing we can do to change that. There's no rationale. There's no ability. There's no justification to say, no, you murdered that person, you will therefore be punished. Or, you launched rockets into Israel and things are going to get very bad for you in the near future. So, again, he recognized this decades ago. And everything I've seen since then has been just kind of after the fact. Without free will, we are not deciding. And if we are not deciding, then all bets are off. So, free will does exist, and we have to look at the evidence to see what it says. And if you're going to interpret the evidence, say there is no free will, then you're basically saying I am determined to say this, and I also believe that green jello cures cancer, and I have a microchip in my head. It's all just rolling of the dice. So that's how important a concept is. Again, so when I look at the evidence, I say, okay, so we're starting off with the brain from the video you showed, and I'm familiar with the research. What you're seeing is that things are happening before we're consciously aware of it. And I interpret that to be we are receiving consciousness. It's not produced by the brain. But again, as a strictly materialistic paradigm precludes that possibility. You have to believe that what we think comes absolutely last. Okay, so there's biology, chemistry, your history, psychology, everything else causing those decisions, and what you decide dead last. At best, it's a press secretary. It is an after the fact and post hoc rationalization. Doesn't really mean anything. But then if we go down that route, where we're going to say, okay, we're determined, you can't actually criticize anyone for anything. The Palestinians are just as right as the Israelis. They're both determined. It's just a matter of luck. And that's where you get a lot of very left-wing politics from. You get the left-wing politics is that, I can just pop out person A and, swap places with person B, and it's just going to work out about the same. And we've discovered that's not it, because individuals make decisions.
Do you think those people think that they're right and that they're correct? Like, does each side have that strong intuition that they're correct, or you think that they're kind of acting blindly when they're wrong as opposed to when they're right?
Well, that gets to a little bit of a psychology philosophy point. Jonathan Haidt covers this very well. And he basically establishes that all of us are programmed to do the right thing, that we consider our actions based on morality. So, for example, you can take the global warming crowd as a perfect example. Everything they are doing is justified by saving the world. So, if it creates a totalitarian dystopia, hey, that's better than the world oceans boiling away. You can look at anyone throughout history, and every single one of them was thinking, I'm doing this for the right reasons. Now, again, what are the right reasons? You have to allow for reason, and reason obliges free will.
Gotcha. All right, Logan, the other Logan, the blue shirt.
Blue team or gray team? Brown team.
Blue team. We're gonna get blue team on now. So when you hear this kind of stuff, does this give you a problem, or what does this do for you or not do for you when you hear this kind of data?
Well, I changed my screen name. That's a common handle.
Ray Nomad. Gotcha.
Yeah, if you just want to call me that.
Sure.
And I'm sorry. I want to interrupt the flow before I forget. Why do you miss Alan Alda?
I think he passed away. He didn't. Nope. Thank God. I must have been fake news, man. Thank goodness for that, man. I love that guy. I love that guy.
I thought I said What? Wait a minute. I searched and no, he is 87 years old, still
Good.
kicking. All right.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
Well, with me, there's a line between what I believe or what I want to believe and the fact of the matter. And I don't think we can say the fact of the matter is we have free will or we're determined. There is a fact. There is a truth, a situation, a reality of which one there is, or if it's compatibilism. So I don't think we can base things on we can't judge anybody if we're determined, because that would be our opinion versus the fact. Now, if it is a fact, we would be determined to judge people if there was no free will. I'm a compatibilist. I would say there are some things we can't choose and some things we can. Take the recent shooting that was up northeast, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I can't choose whether that upsets me, whether people die and upsets me. That's just a reaction I'm going to have. I don't see any free will in that. I can't choose to blow it off and just go, oh, I don't care that people die. But I could choose, if I were in that situation, how I might deal with it. If I had a gun, I might choose whether to shoot him or not. If he was pointing his gun at me, I wouldn't be choosing whether or not I was going to shoot him. I'd just shoot him. It'd just be a reaction. But if I was behind him and I saw him shooting people and it upset me, I could decide whether or not I'm going to kill that man. I can't choose whether I love my wife. I can't choose whether or not I enjoy petting my cat. I just do enjoy it. So I think there are some things that are free for us to choose and some that aren't. I could choose which route I take to go to the store. I could choose which store I go to. I could choose the product I buy. But if I desire ice cream, I can't suddenly decide that I don't desire ice cream.
Oh, so it sounds like you're kind of falling into that compatibilist view where you're kind of determined by your wants and things like that and desires and anything that you know, but you do have the freedom to choose within that framework. Would that be fair?
Oh my gosh. Hold on. Stupid cat.
Uh-oh.
Speaking of the cat.
I'm back.
Yeah, I see you.
All right. Cat decided to unplug me.
Oh, I see.
So
Gotcha.
what was that last little bit? I was here.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you. So, would you consider yourself a compatibilist?
Yeah, I said that. Yeah,
okay, cool. Yeah. All right, cool. All right, Logue, how's it going, man? How do you fall in on this?
I guess I would fall more in compatibilism. The way I see it, free will is kind of like a divine paradox in the sense that, like, yeah, whatever set all this in motion, whatever my next action is could probably be traced all the way back to like the Big Bang, right? Like an entire causal chain, like how you were saying. And so that would be more like determinism. And also in the sense that I believe in like that there is like a fate, you know what I mean? Like in my worldview, I believe that there is like this ultimate fate at the end of time where essentially everything that's ever happened is all justified and reconciled. And whatever shape that may take, I have no idea. You know what I mean? Like wrap your head around that. You know what I mean? There's a lot of pain and suffering to make up for it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And a lot of it's you know, seemingly unnecessary. You know what I mean? There's innocent people that die every day. And yeah, so,
Yeah.
but that
Yep.
being said, I wouldn't consider myself a determinist. Like, that's more like a Calvinism.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity would be purely deterministic.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, yes, I do believe in free will. The way I see it, it's like what Sabina Hassenfelder was saying is like, if there is free will, whatever it is not compatible with the laws of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is like, yes, I do believe there is free will. It doesn't match up with our science because it's a spiritual free will in a sense. So like
Hmm.
whenever they have that guy hooked up with all the electrodes on his head,
Mm-hmm.
the way my worldview sees it is that the self, the I that I consider me, is not really a physical thing. It's like an external entity living in this realm of forms, like the Neoplatonic world of forms,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is not a physical world, and it's not measurable. It's immeasurable. It's not a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it is what is sending signals to the brain, and the brain is more like a receiver. That's why in the physical world it shows up that the neurons are firing up before we're even consciously aware that we made a decision. But that's just showing how good our brains are. Like how well do you take care of your brain? Do you do you know, memory activities every day and eat good food, or are you drinking a lot of alcohol? Because then it's going to take your brain a long time to make that decision, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But your soul, yourself, that isn't real, like in the way that we would consider things to be real.
Physically real. Right.
Yeah, physically real doesn't mean that it's not real. It's just that's what's making the decisions. And in that sense, that's where we would have free will. So I guess I would be more like Kant and Descartes, where
Mm-hmm.
they believe in the non-physical free will that
Mm-hmm.
Hassenfelder was talking about. So that's
Yes.
where I would
Yes.
fall
Yes.
in line.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that about the platonic realms and that sort of analogy. It's like there's actually a scientific term for that, and it's called a Hilbert space. So there's like a space of possible distributions, and it can go either way. And so I think there's some work by a biologist named Michael Levin. I think he's going to win a Nobel Prize, to be quite honest with you. I think he's actually going to win a prize on this. But this guy, he traces biology, and he asks the same question about free will. He even questions the idea of cognition that goes all the way down. Now, a lot of panpsychist people, they love this guy because they look at him like their hero, their savior, like he's actually brought their philosophy to the proof table, to the evidence table in science, and they just love this guy. But what his whole thing is that he's saying that um, all intelligence is collective intelligence. So even your brain is not just, you don't just have this one self that we identify with. There's like all these multiple cascades of selves, cognition within one body that are constantly mirroring each other, working on making decisions, and it all emerges up to the executive function of the brain. And so you identify with the final decision or the final behavior or whatever it is, unawares of the fact that you didn't come up with anything. Your brain did. And when we say you, talking about the one you identify with, but the you that we're actually talking about is all these different things all the way back. Like you said, that you can trace it all the way back. That's you all the way back. So in that sense, in that aspect, what kind of evidence is there for this? Well, he says it's not only in human brains, it goes all the way down to your most simple one cells, your single cells. So you've got this collective intelligence that acts even within cells. They make novel decisions, they make choices, they react to stresses in the environment. And this is the basis of evolution. It's the basis of how things actually work and evolve. And it's really interesting. And so he's got to experiment. Like he's saying, if this is true, if what I'm saying, this far-fetched stuff that I'm telling you is true, then if I do this experiment, it should have this result. And he's done it numerous of times and proven it over and over and over and over in different examples, different cells, flatfish. He's done it in slime molds, not to mention higher evolved creatures as well, So this guy's really fascinating with his work. So I'd invite all you guys, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, look at Michael Levin to understand how there's actually intelligent. And I understand a lot of people might say, yeah, but you as a naturalistic pantheist, of course you're going to be promoting that kind of stuff, But I'm telling you, I'm not biased. This is just objective stuff. So I'm not even going to present it here. I'm just going to let you guys look at it on your own time if you're so interested. But anyways, I'm going to bring on Katie Seitz, and she is studying free will right now. How are you doing, Katie?
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Is my mic a little bit too loud? It's a new mic.
It sounds crystal clear, I tell you that.
Nice.
Not distorted, not distorted. So you were telling me earlier that you were actually studying in psychology the subject of free will. So how does this stuff strike you when you hear this kind of stuff?
So it's quite an interesting topic. So I come from the position that free will and determinism are sort of work in tandem with each other. The sort of one of the there's two different ways to look at it. So there's like realism. So realism, the fact of it is that free will really doesn't actually exist, but in practice, it does exist. So for us as a human experience, we do experience free will, and that makes it important in that sense. So it's not really either or when it comes to free will or determinism. Both are real.
Compatibilism, okay.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't sort of have a client in psychology and be giving them and talking to them from the sense of determinism and talking about their decisions being determined and things like that. You just couldn't do that in practice. You'd have to use free will because they're experiencing free will.
Gotcha.
So I definitely think that the two are one and the same. Now, when it comes to morality, though, that's when I sort of separate a little bit because from my understanding, morality, unless we're talking about ethics, morality is more of a religious thing. And I don't think that really has a place in a conversation when you're talking about the actual science behind all of this.
Right. Okay. So, Alejandro, so just to be clear, I you've made a few statements like when you were telling me how you respond, how you take all of these experiments. So I'm not sure. It sounds like you're kind of on the compatibilist side, but I'm not sure. Are you more libertarian free will, would you say, like absolute free will, or are you more like free will just within certain parameters?
No, I believe we have libertarian free will.
Okay.
Believe is too light a word. We have libertarian free will. We're absolutely free.
Absolutely free. So that would say that you are not determined by your culture, or like you're not influenced at all by your culture, your time and place that you live. How do you explain, like, say, in a Muslim country, that most people are Muslims because of their society and culture? How do you explain that if there's libertarian free will?
People can choose to be rational, or they can choose to be irrational. That's what it comes down to. Now, what you're asking, the base question is, what does free will do? And you mentioned that earlier in the introduction when you highlighted that yes, having free will doesn't mean that I can flap my arms and fly. Okay, free will means I can choose between being rational and irrational. Okay, now any Muslim can rationally review what is the best life and how to reach that best life, and come to conclusions that I think would be different from what Islamic culture would dictate, to put it mildly. Now, the question I have to throw back to you is, as a compatibilist, how do you know when you're being rational, and how do you know when you're not? So you've said several times, and several different people have said the same thing. So, I have free will here, but not here. And as you're all saying the same thing, the question is, at what point do you know, oh, this was a decision I made of my own free will? Oh, no, that was not, because near as I can tell, we can go back to, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Okay,
Hmm.
are they being rational? Did they choose? Are you choosing right now when you say you're compatible? Are you being rational there? Is that a choice you made of your free will, or are you a compatibilist because you were determined to be compatibilist?
Hmm. How would you respond, Gray Nomad?
Well, I would wonder, like I said before, could Alejandro just choose not to love his wife just on a dime?
Mm.
Okay, you know what? Can we not make this about me?
Okay,
All
can
right?
anyone?
Can you? No. Can we just
Mhm.
piss off these questions? Okay, because you're always going to turn it around me. And
I don't think I could choose to not love my wife.
I can absolutely
I
choose what
don't.
I do.
Okay.
Okay. Now, people can choose how they feel, and that is true. Okay. You can choose to love your wife, and you can choose not to. Okay.
Mm.
What
Could you
about you,
choose?
Scott? Katie?
So you're saying you cannot. Great. Wonderful. So you're making the case that I can't choose to love my wife. I can't choose not to love my wife. So my emotions are completely out of my control. And, people just do crazy shit from time to time, and there's nothing they can do about it. You're arguing for determinism. Okay, so you piss off
Okay.
these little
Mm.
examples and just say, I believe in
Mm.
determinism, and we can go from there.
Scott,
Do I
Katie,
make myself
what
clear?
about you guys?
Oh, say that again, Gray
What
Nomad.
about you guys? Whoever you have been in love with before, unless you're in love with somebody right now, perhaps your child, do you think you can just choose not to love them on a dime?
For me, the way I would answer that is that I can choose not to love them, but it would be a process that would take time
So
to
there
make
wouldn't be
that
Right.
feeling, to reinforce that feeling. But um, at the whim, like at the will, like could I just will myself to not believe in, say, the universe, or not to believe in, like, could a Christian just not believe, could will himself not to genuinely believe in God, right? Like, I don't know. I don't
I
think
like
so.
to.
Yeah, but if you were going to, if you were going to like will yourself to not do something, say like go against like a biological urge or something like loving another person or something,
Mhm.
then how would you differentiate that from as that being free will from there being an inner influence which had led you to want to will that away?
Oh, so you're kind of turning around what Alejandro asked in a way. You're kind of asking the same question. Alejandro, so you kind of like said the same thing. You're like, how does a compatibilist know when he's being rational and deciding when he's, and then when he's not? So how do you know that your loving your wife is a decision between, it's just a biological thing that's kind of pushed you, determined you
Yeah,
in that position?
Because I don't always follow what biology dictates. That's a big difference. You guys are basically arguing deterministic hedonism dishonestly, and
Mm,
well,
that's
can I
really
add
juvenile.
something? I just want to add something real quick.
sure.
Love, first of all, is completely irrational, anyways. So you can't
No, it's
rationalize
not.
love. I think
You're
it
talking
is.
about
I think love is irrational. And it's divine. That's what makes it irrational. So all these things that I consider spiritual or divine, they're all like paradoxical. And so, like in the spiritual community, they'll say there's different levels of consciousness. Like, if and I would equate this to different levels of free will as well. So, if you're just on autopilot, you're not very aware of your actions. You're just very reactionary, very spontaneous. Any little thing just determines exactly how you're going to react right after that. Then I would say that you don't have a lot of free will. You're like on autopilot. You're like an NPC. You're letting life control you. But people who have a lot of spiritual practices and they do a lot of mindfulness meditation and deep contemplation and like self-reflection and do it in real time where they don't have to react. They can think about it and respond appropriately. They may not be able to control how they feel. Like if somebody makes me mad, well, I'm mad. I'm sorry. I'm mad now. I couldn't control that, but I can control how I respond after that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I think that could even go all the way up to where, you know, you don't have very much free will because you're reactionary, all the way up to the point where now you're working in tandem with God's will and you have complete libertarian free will where you're like Jesus in a sense, where, you know what I mean, whatever God wants is the same thing what you want, and so it happens. And it's just like, you know, but maybe we're getting a lot out into woo-woo land now, but
Just
that's
one
how
question. If it's divine and what you want is what God wants, how would you, and God had created you, then how would you know that it was free will and not some form of determinism anyway?
If I can answer that question, God is rational. That's how we know. So this question comes up a lot, and I've answered this question several times, and it comes down to the nature of God. Now, many people try to argue a straw man of God, and that, you know, God asks people to do crazy things, and that's how we know it's not God. You know, God
Didn't
is
he in the
all perfect.
Bible?
What?
Didn't he in the Bible? I mean, in the Old Testament is very different to the New
well,
Testament.
he's a Zoroastrian, so
Yeah.
So
He's a
that's
little different.
Except he has claimed that the Christian, God's work, the God that Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians all worship the same God. So yes, you can use the Bible against.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes.
okay. And we worship the same God, and now you can't tell the difference between the observer and the observed. The Old Testament is a chronicle of the Jewish people innovating their conception of God. Okay, they start off with believing in a storm god, and they innovate the concept of God over thousands of years. Now, if you'd like to continue to be anti-Semitic, that's fine, but I think now is an extremely inappropriate time to say, "Oh, the God of the Old Testament is evil," because that's straight up anti-Semitic.
Just a minute, I'm not being anti-Semitic at all. Please
Mm-mm.
don't
Well, you're
No one said
saying
accuse
the
that.
me of
God
being
that
anti-Semitic.
you're
No.
saying the gods that the Jews worship, which is the Old Testament God, is X, Y, and Z.
I never
Okay.
mentioned the Jews. I
You're
just
mentioning
mentioned
the
what the
Old
Bible
Testament.
had said.
Okay.
That's all I mentioned. Please
All
don't
right.
accuse me of being something that I'm not. That's not
Okay.
very nice at all.
Well, you're
Yeah, I
degrading all
do
theists
know.
when you're doing that. You're saying, "Oh, you know, you believe in a God who is X, Y, and Z, and that's not good, so therefore you're not good." All right. You know,
I
I'm
do
a
know that
Zoroastrian.
Zoroastrians believe that God is not the author of evil, but in the Bible it says that God is the creator of evil. So
Right.
there is like some distinctions between Zoroastrianism and Christianity, and I think that's safe to say. But
Isaiah 45:7. Yeah, he is. I Yahweh have created both darkness and light. I've created evil and good. I Yahweh have done all these things. That's how the Hebrew scripture actually reads.
Yeah, and that's basically Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, I'm
Evil
sorry if
is
I
the decision.
misunderstood Zoroastrianism in any way, but
Zoroastrianism, the core of it is that people can choose to be irrational. People can choose to serve the Angramanyu, and by doing so, they basically make the world a worse place, and they themselves become unhappy, and they end up in the house of lies, the worst existence, the Drujitama. So
Now,
And
when it
so,
comes to this God,
okay, go ahead.
let me ask you this, because this is just a question. I mean, the way I understand Christianity, the way I was taught, and from everyone I've spoken to, so God has a nature. He created. He's all knowing, all powerful. So he knows the future. So in fact, if God decided, I'm going to forgive my people, the Israelites, and not smite them because they turned away from their evil ways,
right.
Did he in fact change his mind or not? Because if he knew everything he was going to do in the future, because he's omniscient, it would seem like he didn't change his mind at all, but he was kind of determined by his nature to forgive them when they turned away from evil. Would that be fair to say?
You asking me?
Either one, because Zoroastrianism, I guess, is kind of the same concept of the God. And
Okay,
I'll ask Lode as well.
This is something you're going to need to understand. Number one, as a Zoroastrian, I can read the Bible and I interpret it as a Zoroastrian, just like atheists read the Bible and interpret it as atheists, which is, they read the Bible and they go, oh, obviously the answer is because God is evil. Okay, so as a Zoroastrian, when I hear things like this, I'm like, okay, God is all good. That's the starting point because I'm a Zoroastrian. God is rational. Okay, so what happened? Okay, well, God obviously knew what they were going to do and decided. He changed his mind. He decided at the beginning of time. It wasn't that they did something, but I mean, and he changed his mind. He knew from the beginning what was happening. Okay, what was going to happen, and he planned accordingly. He knew what he had to say. It's kind of like almost like making a threat. It's like you got a kid and they're like, if you do X, I'm going to spank you. Okay. And the kid goes, oh, no, I better not do it. Now, as a parent, I never wanted to spank the kid, and I was pretty sure he wasn't going to do X if I threatened to spank him. But nevertheless, that was what I had to do to get to the end result. And the end result, of course, is the best possible universe.
Gotcha. So, why did God create anything? If God is perfect, was he not perfect? Did he have to create in order to become perfect, or was he always perfect? And if so, if he was always perfect, why did he create?
Okay. I'm trying to articulate this. I'm trying because it's actually a pretty advanced concept. Okay. God.
Can I chime in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep.
Right on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I have been working on this concept, and I've gone to a church where they've talked about this a lot, but it's like we are co-creating with God. And so, to use an analogy, I play Dungeons and Dragons a lot, but I don't know what everyone's going to do. It's like they are free agents within my game. As the dungeon master, I just create the environment around them and plug little non-playable characters in the game, and I act them out, but they respond accordingly, and whatever they choose to do, I have to respond to that instantaneously. And so I kind of see this as the same thing in a very grandiose, metaphysical way. It's like we are free agents within this game, quote unquote game. And so, yeah, let's say God created the beginning and the end, but the middle's kind of up to everything else.
But why did he create? Why did he create
Why
though?
did he create?
Why did he
Uh,
put this game
I
together?
will go ahead and chime in.
So that we could. Oh, all right. Well, that's what I was getting to, is because like if we didn't have free will, there would be no point in this. Like it wouldn't be fun. If we already knew what was going to happen before it happened, then there would be literally no reason for us to exist at all. Like
But was
it wouldn't
God
be worth it. It wouldn't be, you know.
right? So God had to create, or did he have a choice to create or not to create? And since he did, what was the reasoning behind it? Because he wanted to, or as part
I
of
think
his
it would
nature?
be to, yeah, like in a sense, God had to know everything, and that included all of this. So there's this quantum theory that says every decision that you make, it branches off into an alternate reality. You know what I mean? There's this reality where you made this decision, but then there's also the other reality where you made the separate decision. And then once you factor in all the nuance that goes into every decision you've ever made, where it's not just left or right, sometimes there's a four-branched fork in the road. You know what I mean? There's a whole array of different choices and variations of choices and timing. You know what I mean? Like maybe there's one universe where I was a little bit more aware and I didn't miss that turn back there 15 minutes ago or whatever.
But I guess what I'm getting at is why did he create that situation? However you interpret it, like if whether it's many worlds, theory or whatever that will account for a lot of these things. Regardless, why did he create to begin with? Is it because he wanted to, or is it because he had to because of his nature?
There's a couple of answers. Okay. Number one, if God did not create, God would be a solipsistic God, okay, where he is everything. And that's solipsism. And solipsism, there's no reason, okay? So for reason and morality to exist, there must be a creation, okay? Now, intrinsic in that creation, for morality to exist, there must be free will. And that's one of the things that's absolutely primal in Zoroastrianism, is that as part of creation, we are endowed with the choice to do good or do evil, to be rational or irrational, to obey God or disobey God. So many words. So you start off. Let's imagine God. If God did not create the cosmos, okay. Well, like I said, we've got solipsism right there. Okay, it's just God is all it is, and that is not maximally great. So as part of the definition to be maximally great, God has created everything. So everything that's not God is created by God. So there you go.
Okay. Well, we've got thank you for that, by the way, Alejandro. And we've also got another guest here, Joshua the Void.
What's going on, everybody?
Atheist Uprising. We're going to be doing a show tomorrow, and we're going to kind of be chopping it up and discussing whether skepticism is compatible with my spirituality. So we'll love to talk about that. But
big time.
Oh man, it's going to be a juicy one right there. Okay.
It's going to be a hell of a good one. I've been thinking about certain things too, because
good.
I watched your show. I watched it, so I was thinking about it. I was like, all right, how am I going to answer these questions? And tomorrow is going to be a great conversation. But talking about today's show, I'm going to say that I'm more of a determinist, because I think a lot of individuals, when they talk about determinism, they get confused with predeterminism. Right? So this stuff has been happening way before even you were born. Where if we look at determinism, what it's actually talking about is that you are determined by the influences that you're running into. Right? So the stimuli of the outside world is the very thing that equates to your own behavior and how you interact with that stimuli in and of itself. And henceforth, that's why being a determinist, you can also be, let's just say, a theist and become an atheist down the line. Because it's based on that stimulus that is constantly interacting with you. So in and of itself, I am a determinist, yes.
Gotcha.
So what would the implications for that for you be? Like if that were as far as like criminal justice system, let's just use that as an example.
Absolutely.
Right. So like, would they be like more or less innocent in that sense under your form of determinism?
I wouldn't even state no, absolutely not. But it's not against my thought process. It's because these individuals are a hindrance towards society in and of itself, right? If you are harming a particular individual, you might be in and of itself determined to harm those people. But at the same time, the majority of individuals that are within society do not wish to harm people. So the best way in order to interact with those type of individuals is to remove them from society so that the rest of society can function properly. So yes, they are determined to do these things. The reality of the situation is that we can deal with that on a separate basis.
Okay, so you basically argue for the Chinese system where we're going to punish people regardless of whether
I
they're
don't
guilty
see
or
how I
innocent.
said that.
Yeah, you're basically saying the good of the many outweighs the good of the few. So we can go, all right. So it wasn't really your fault. You had no mens rea. It was not your intention. But we're gonna head and take the Uyghurs and re-educate them because that's good for society.
I mean, the thing that is for the benefit of society is the best for society.
Yeah,
right. We have a
So
different legal system here in America.
if people are killing other
our legal system is predicated on justice.
Alejandro, let me speak. Don't talk over me. So the one thing is that we're trying to talk right now is that when we're engaging, right, individuals who are murdering other people, we need to remove those individuals from society. If people have different ideas than me, I don't give a shit. But if people are murdering people, they should be removed from society. I don't know how you're getting that I'm advocating for the Chinese system or the Chinese communist system when I'm literally giving you the distinction. So I don't know what the hell you're talking about. But
can I just chime in, please? I haven't heard from you in a minute.
Yeah, can I just add to a bit what you said there, Josh? And I think you'd agree with me. I mean, we've worked together and stuff in the past. But as part of like determinism, what you're arguing here would also be that although the people are determined to, say, commit a crime or something, you could also, because it's not predeterminism, it's influence based, you could also influence them through rehabilitation or something to be able to rehabilitate them back, determine them back into the correct behavior.
There you go. Hit the nail right on top of the goddamn head. Yes.
So it's like our consciousness or our will or choices are causal in itself. Basically.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
But the thing is that it's only based on the outside stimulus, which is actually interacting with ourselves and our way of engaging that stimulus on the outside.
This kind of brings up a question. And Katie might be able to bring some insight on this, being that she's studying psychology. What do we mean by the self? Because this is never really understood, because everybody keeps saying I, the self wants to do, like, who is this self we're even referring to? Because it seems like there's so much evidence out there, at least scientifically, that it's kind of hard to pinpoint what that even means, right?
Well, in fact, it's actually a very difficult topic, and it's still something that within psychology, and especially within neurobiology as well, something that we're still actually trying to figure out. But the most basic form of it would be, it is all of the impulses that make up us, all of the things that would identify you as I. Now, how specifically that works within the science and within the within the biology and within the psychology, as I say, is still something that we are actively researching, and we don't fully understand yet.
Now, Alejandro had once said to me something I agreed with that kind of nailed that point home. And I think this is also true with Buddhists. I used to know a Buddhist priest, and we used to talk about this too. And he said that the self doesn't exist, therefore this kind of lends itself to some forms of theism or something like that, or maybe even a sort of, even you could say theism or some sort of naturalistic pantheist sort of view, maybe. What do you say, Alejandro? Do you remember that?
Well, I don't actually remember that. The idea of the self is very easily described as continuity of self. Okay, so we can look at ourselves at any point in life and we are different. So in a strictly materialistic universe, there is no you. And this, of course, goes to crime and punishment and, stuff that I went through in college. It's like, okay, so if person at timestamp A commits crime X, at timestamp B, that's a different person. They might look alike, they might talk alike, but they are empirically, measurably different people. They have different memories. So you'd literally be punishing someone else. It would on a simple level be like punishing a twin. So that gets really sticky right there. So in theism, we have the idea that the abstract is real. So who I was as a 10-year-old doesn't have anything in common with me now except perhaps our name. But I'm the same person, and who I am now is going to be different from who I am at 80 years old. But I'm the same person. But that personhood, that self, is not part of the empirical universe. So again, we have free will and we have the self, which are not part of empiricism. Now, if we understand that determinism and not having a self are false, they must be untrue. Now, to get back to something Joshua said, we're getting to the point where, we really know better, but we have to pretend otherwise, which is frightening on a number of levels.
Katie, that kind of reminds me of the split brain experiments. Katie, do you know anything about the split brain patients and the work of, I think his name was Ramachandran, where you could split the brain and then one half of the person was an atheist and the other half of the person was a theist? And how does that work?
It's been a while. It's been a while since I actually researched that, so I'm not 100% certain on the specifics of that. I'd have to go back and research it again.
Okay. Yeah, because it's very interesting that people can have these these split brain surgery, and you've got these two different personalities going on at the same time, right? And that's kind of interesting.
That also,
Go ahead.
There's even research where like a guy has gotten a heart transplant from someone else, but then personality traits from that other person come out after the heart transplant, and then so they were baffled and were like, well, there's must be neurons in the brain that have something to do with personality, or I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that go into those finer points. One thing that I've always thought about when it comes to free will is like, if there could be an experiment, and I'm not saying this is ethical, and I'm not saying any scientist should ever try to do this, but like a person gets cloned or whatever. So you have a whole array of clones. They all share the exact same genetics. They're all born and raised and grow up in a controlled room, and like everything's exactly the same for them. And then they go out into the world and they're all released into the exact same world. Would they all make the exact same decisions based on how they were brought up? Or like there's this meme that says, me and my twin brother, I became really successful and he's homeless and an alcoholic. And when they asked us, what's your secret or why did you end up here? We both had the same answers, because my father was an alcoholic. And to me, that means like, yeah, two people can go through the same experiences and it changed them completely in different ways. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that gives credence to the free will or compatibilist. But I don't know. I just, maybe if you set up that experiment, they all would just react exactly the same. And then if that was the case, then I'm not sure how you could say anything other than determinism.
Well, I could add to that. But, if you did have this experiment, I would, obviously we can't do the experiment like you say, but I would argue that each person would make would possibly make different decisions, because the whole thing of determinism would be ongoing. The influences would be ongoing. So the influences, they would all be distinct, different people. So regardless of having the same background, having the same history, the new influences that are affecting them would over time would gradually increase the differences between them.
And that's if we release them into the exact same controlled world. You know what I'm saying? Like, where they all had the exact same situations afterhand. Like, the experiment was still ongoing, still controlled.
Yeah,
but how controlled would it be? I mean, are you controlling it down to the anatomical level, or are you just talking about controlled as in sort of, as a social aspect, or controlled within an environmental aspect? I mean, how controlled are you saying this experiment would actually be? Because if it was controlled right down to the anatomical level, then I could agree that they would be exactly the same person, because there would be absolutely no changes whatsoever in anything, right down to the atom itself.
And I guess in my experiment, I guess like the only differentiation would be like the time, you know what I mean? Like maybe like the the arrangement of the stars in the sky and what hour of day it is. But as far as like all the social, like they all have like the same parental units or whatever. I don't know how exactly it would be set up, but and then they all get released into the same exact social environment, like a Truman Show, I guess. But it's all exactly the same. The only difference would be that it's not all atomically controlled. It's different, maybe variations in temperature. But do you think that would really have that much of an effect on like decision making? Or
well, in a sense, yes. I mean, it would be gradual. I mean, the more controlled it is, the more gradual any changes would be. But like, just imagine, like, you're walking down the street or something, and you're just in your life, and you smell a certain smell, or or something like that. Then that can have profound impacts upon what decisions you'll make in the future. So you would have, like, is it going to be controlled to the point where they're all smelling the same things, all feeling the same touches, all tasting the exact same things? I mean, any sort of deviation is going to produce a slightly different impulse, whether no matter how big or small that impulse is, over time it's going to increase the changes between those people.
Okay. That kind of reminds me of these magicians that they set up these little subconscious cues, like certain colors in the background, real elaborate. Like they get these people to get on a bus, travel to their office to do some kind of interview with this magician, right? And all along the way, they have these little signs that are specifically placed at the right place that they know that their person is going to see along the way. Once they get to the interview, the magician says, I know exactly what you're going to choose. And so he sets this thing up and it works. The magician's able to determine exactly what this guy is how he's going to answer or what he's going to do. You know what I mean? And it's because he set all these cues up subconsciously to affect the person's mind, which, influence the guy's decision without him even knowing it. And then the guy's like, how did you know I was going to answer that way? How did you know that?
Scott,
Like, how do we explain that?
If I can chime in
I
on
think
that
that's
point.
what's so horrifying about. Okay, go ahead, Alejandro.
Yeah, we're getting away from what is rational and what is irrational to back with feelings, and that's one of the core questions. Your basically determinism is that it's all a matter of feelings, that the Israelis are going by their impulses and the Palestinians are going by their impulses, and there's no real right or wrong. Theism obliges being rational. So no matter what my feelings are, there's right or wrong. You know, you can take something like stealing. Okay, so you're walking along and you realize, you know, I could steal X, whatever it is, and completely get away with it. Okay.
Right.
Now, you know, if you're going to argue that feelings are the be all end all, and so you feel like stealing it and you're better off for it, you're an idiot not to.
Okay, so feelings really are fake and they don't really influence anything. So how do you then, well, I mean, just assuming I'm granting you that feelings have nothing to do with it. If that's true, then how do you explain the magician being able to determine after setting up all the cues and stuff? How do you explain
once again,
that?
this is a free will question.
See, that's what I think is.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
You know,
Sorry, I just really want to talk on that.
Sure, I'll be brief then.
Okay.
It's really a question of, you know, what you feel doesn't affect right or wrong. What you feel does not affect true or false. You know,
Right.
I can want 1 + 1 = 3 all day long, and I can
Right.
be like, you know, really hoping and wanting, and I could be determined, whatever. However, but you know what? 1 + 1 is not going to equal 3. Okay. So
So
feelings, they're great, but they don't affect what is true, false,
I
right, or
agree.
wrong.
I would agree that it kind of sounds limiting to say that people are really driven by their feelings. Well, maybe that's the brute fact of the matter in reality, that what we call rational and good and bad is really just based on feelings that we've accrued over time. Is that possible?
Logue, you had something to say?
Yeah, go ahead and answer, Logue.
Well, just going back to the mentalist aspect of what you were saying, Scott, that particular piece of information is what I find so horrifying about hard determinism. Like, if that is the case, and everything we do can be just manipulated so easily, and we really have no control over it, but there are people who know how to control us through these little subconscious cues and weird signs and stuff, then we really are just at the disposal of whatever entity is smart enough to be able to manipulate us through advertising or whatever. But to that point, I would have to agree with Alejandro in the sense that, and this is what I think is so awesome about like Christian theology and the weird, like, it's like a riddle. It's a weird riddle of a paradox where how do you be more free? And like, we usually equate freedom as the ability to do what you want. Mm-hmm. But in Christianity, it's like you're more free if you're able to deny yourself of what you want to do and do what you ought to do, or do what you feel is right, or do on your heart. And so like you're more free by not doing the one thing that you.
But Logue, here's the challenge. You just said something that made me remember, so I'm going to challenge you then. And me and Alejandro went back and forth on this for like hours, I think, one day. But I'll go ahead and throw the challenge at you too. And I know it sounds very atheistic, but I'm going to go ahead and go with it anyways.
Go for it.
So you just said that, you know, we're at the whims of what people want and stuff like that. Uh-oh. And so the question is, man, I just forgot my train of thought. I just lost it. Say what you said again so I can get back on track. For some reason, it wasn't my will. This is kind of proven
freedom as being rational. It's like Christianity and theism in general teaches the distinction between doing what we want or following our impulses and following, you know, righteousness.
Perfect. Okay, so here's the question. So let's use something we can all agree with, Christian, atheist, whoever you are. Let's pick this example. Okay. I want to eat chocolate cake, but I know that I'm unhealthy and that I can't eat chocolate cake unless it's going to give me a heart attack, let's say, or I'm scared of that.
You're diabetic.
So I'm going to deny what I want to go ahead and skip the chocolate cake and eat the fruit instead. Have I have I went ahead and proven free will because I went ahead and did what I didn't want to do? Or did I simply pick a greater want over this want? In other words, there's a hierarchy of wants, and I reason myself into doing what I want to do, just a better thing that I want to do. What do you think, Joshua? I haven't heard from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely correct. I really do believe that when individuals choose that they want something other than another thing, it is predominantly based on that greater want, right? So if you want to be healthy, then the number one thing is that yes, your want for a chocolate cake, let's just say, might be at even with being healthy. But at one time, you're going to rationalize that this want is more than the other, or the other one is more than the other. So it's not actually a choice. It's based on the accumulation of what the want really is and what that individual truly
Let's make it even more extreme.
Can I just chime in and add something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so there's also I like what you say about wants, and I definitely agree with you, Joshua, about the wants as well. But I think they also need to bring in the fact of needs. So there's a difference between wants and needs. Now, we may know what we want, but we don't always know what we need. And sometimes that can come through as an impulse from, say, whatever you want to call it, like the subconscious or whatever. That can come through, and we act upon that, thinking it's a want, thinking that it's a choice that we've made, but in fact it's come from something deep down that we needed.
Yeah, that's
very
why
good.
so many people
that's
act
powerful.
out against their best interest, right?
And so, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Log.
Pardon?
Log was asking
sorry.
if we could hear him. Yeah, he was just.
Oh, I hear you, man.
But yeah, that's so whenever she was talking about the need, how that's kind of, she made it almost seem like transcendent. You know what I mean? Like, where does that it's like an intuitive, like a subconscious thing. Like, you don't always know what you need, but there's like this urging, you know what I mean? It's kind of like something in the background tugging you towards it, in a sense. Is that right, or am I misunderstanding?
In a sense, yes. So a need can come from something that we don't quite realize that we need, but it comes through as a want. So we think it's a want, and within our experience, it is something that we want, but we can't always sort of describe why we want it.
Okay, and what happens when doing the right thing sucks, or doing the wrong thing pays good?
Well, I think at that point, can you explain a little bit more on
Okay,
that?
well, a lot of what we're talking about is assuming that what is good feels good, what feels good is good. And that is not always the case, to be polite about it. So, okay, let's imagine a scenario, whatever it is, where, doing the quote-unquote right thing is going to suck ass. Okay, so what do? What happens when doing the wrong thing is going to pay well?
But I think what they're saying is that your inner desire to be righteous exceeds your desire for the pleasure of the whatever it is.
Yeah, I think what Katie was saying was that we have needs, and maybe it's like Alejandro said, it's going to suck ass to go with what you need rather than what you want. But then you go ahead and do what you need. So that kind of is a defeater for determinism, it seems. But then what you could say is that you simply want to do what you need to do more than what you want to do, if that makes sense. Or maybe I'm contradicting myself.
Yeah, so
I got a jet, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Lo.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming by, man.
Yeah, you bet.
We'll do it next time.
All right, bye.
Now I'm going to bring in Al alive in, since we have more room to bring more. We got people lining up, so that's awesome. How's it going, Herrera? How you doing, man? Can you hear us?
I'm Herrera.
Yep. Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Hey, how do I sound?
You sound pretty good. Yep.
All right. Good deal. Good.
What do you think about all this so far?
I don't know. It's kind of gotten a little off topic, but I was always under the impression that, free will is just the ability, to compare proposed actions to an ideal standard.
Okay.
So.
To an ideal standard. Is that ideal determined, or do we freely choose that ideal?
I would actually say you can freely choose that.
So the goals are not subjective.
Not really.
Okay.
Virtue always equals, the best choice. So, are you virtuous or are you not?
Can people be born unvirtuous?
Sure. Virtue, virtue is a deed and all. You have to earn it.
Oh, gotcha.
Virtuous act.
What do you think about that, Gray Nomad? How do you respond to that?
Is Al a theist or? No.
I think Herrera, Al, he's a theist, right?
Actually, don't answer. Nobody's. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Okay.
Doesn't matter.
I'm all good with that.
So sorry. Was that last thing you said?
I think he's. Yeah. Go ahead.
Virtue. In order to earn virtue, you have to do virtuous deeds. It's an act.
So Scott asked you about being born unvirtuous. How would you apply that to a sociopath?
Are they virtuous? They're not.
That's my question.
Can you help the way somebody is born?
No, of course not.
So,
and I think that's been part of the discussion is how our prior experiences, background, and even biology can affect our decisions and desires. And I wanted to go back to something someone else said earlier about the Muslims choosing to be rational or not. I think a lot of people have an opinion on what's rational, but if everybody that chooses to be rational was making truly rational decisions, we would all arrive at the same location, because being rational is making decisions based on evidence. I don't think the majority of people consider are actually rational. I work at UPS, and there are a lot of nice people, but they're not the most educated. I often try to guide them through their thought processes when I have discussions with them on Facebook, on their people's personal pages, and they reach a certain point and they just go, "You're not being logical." And I said, "Well, explain to me how I'm not being logical." "Well, you're just not," because they have a different opinion of logic and rationality. They don't go by the philosophical distinctions. They just go by, I think, what Alejandro said, what they feel is logical and rational. So I think Alejandro has a point with that. I think most people do think what they feel is rational and logical. But if in politics, the Republicans and the Democrats and the Libertarians and whoever were all actually, well, if the majority of them were being rational as opposed to thinking they're being rational, we wouldn't have a problem. Because
Right. It's objective, right? It should be an objective standard, right?
Yeah, it should be an objective standard.
Well, does their rationale lead to an ideal standard?
What do you mean by ideal standard?
Well, some people, vote Republican. Some people vote Democrat and all. Are they voting for an ideal standard?
When you say an ideal standard, are you talking about the collective? Are you talking about like the collective, the collective idea of what is right and wrong among a society?
No, not at all.
So where's the referent? You need a referent. If you're going to say something is an ideal standard, that standard should be a absolute referent that you can point to and say, it's immutable, it's unchangeable, it's kind of primary. Otherwise, it's just subjective, arbitrary, and meaningless.
My
Right?
standard would be virtue. Is the standard virtuous? You could actually kind of throw in collectivism in a way in that as well, but collectivism always
I
boils
see
down
what you
to
mean.
individualism. But
Gotcha.
are they living up to an ideal standard?
So, like moral realism in a way. Like
That's muddy water, but okay.
it's like if you're saying that, you know, from what I'm understanding, what you're saying, you're saying that standard isn't people, it isn't a collective of ideas. It's just whatever is the virtuous standard. Period.
Certainly. How are you going to argue who's virtuous?
Right.
No,
right.
In the sandbox right now.
That's
my
moral.
question would
Right.
be: could that virtuous standard exist differently for different, say, cultures?
Is their culture acting virtuous? Yes or no?
Well, yes, each culture views themselves as virtuous, but could that virtuous standard, that ideal standard, as you call it, could that be different, say, in India than it is over in the West?
If you want to put it in the way that they define it, certainly. But are their standards virtuous? Sometimes that's a no, sometimes that's a yes.
So it's kind of like it. Go ahead, Josh.
I just wanted to ask something. What is virtuous to you? That is the big question, because we're going around this generalized question of virtuous and people acting virtuous, but there's many aspects of virtue underneath different cultures and civilizations. So I want to know your pinpoint definition of what you mean by virtuous, and try to be less abstract when you're actually stating that, if you don't mind.
Asking me to list like examples, or what exactly?
Yeah, well, maybe an example.
Virtuous.
Virtuous has a definition. Are your deeds good? And all are these cultural?
But I mean, there's certain individuals, right, that deem killing other individuals as virtuous if they do not follow their set religious
ideas. I can chime in on this,
people. Hold on, let me finish, and then you can go. And then what ends up happening, right, is that those individuals who do the killing believe that they're going to have a higher place within the heavens, for instance. And this is not just based on, because a lot of people would say, oh, you're talking about Islam. That's not even true either. There's also the extent of martyrdom within Christianity. If you die for the ideals of Jesus Christ, then you yourself have a higher, I want to say a higher ideal, but you become a martyr. You become that very thing, right, that is holy and depicted really of what Jesus did.
Okay, now if I can answer that question. Okay, Joshua,
I'll yield to,
there's only, if I can, Hal, there's only two ways this goes. Number one, there is a standard, and we discover it. So, you know, Alive Nosen over here has his ideas about what virtue is, and if you can say, well, that's close, and you're trying to get to the truth. Or you're ultimately arguing what I said at the beginning, which is that we're determined and the Palestinians and the Israelis and the Christians and everyone else are equal. The problem, of course, is that you're actually criticizing him. So if you're criticizing him, then you are implicitly arguing that there is... If you're going to question him, if you're going to criticize him in the questioning, you say, well, that's not virtuous or that is whatever, then you are implicitly arguing that there is a virtue, there is an ultimate answer. So now I'm going to pass it to Alive.
All I'm just saying is that I'm asking a question based on what is the virtuous act because there's a lot of different definitions based on virtue. I've given those definitions. I've only given some. I haven't given plenty of other virtues, such as the virtues within Buddha, such as the virtues within Jainism, such as the virtues within all the rest of these other Eastern philosophies and religions. I'm only giving a couple because I want to hear at least from him what he's talking about, so that I can understand his position more. So I'm asking clarifying questions so that I can understand his position. I'm not criticizing.
Are their deeds good? Yes or no?
Shit, I'm sorry. Your volume is very low at the moment. I can't hear you.
Any better?
Not
yes,
really.
a little better. Say it. Speak again.
Yeah. Any kind of
Okay,
deed.
it's a bit
It can
better.
be.
It's a
It
bit
can
better.
be
I'll try
good.
to work with that.
Yeah, it can be good or bad. Okay. Are there religions or their air quote philosophies doing good or bad? This is why I don't take sides in the Palestinian-Israeli thing. They're both doing evil. So they're not virtuous.
Mhm.
Okay,
And
okay.
they have the free will to
So
choose.
predominantly what you're saying is that the virtuous is only beneficial as the good, whatever the good is. If
Not
I'm understanding you
subjective good. No, objective good. I don't go down the rabbit hole of subjectivity and,
No.
debates like
I'm
this.
just saying of the good. That's why I didn't say of my good. I said of the good.
Do you have a way to explain what is good and what is evil?
I think I do, but that is based on my own subjectivity.
That's the thing. This is a
No, but
black
I'm
or
just
white,
saying that
1 or
if there's a
0.
higher sense
There
of
is
good, right,
higher. That's
then it's
subjective.
of
That's to
the
the
good.
individual. I agree.
Wouldn't the higher sense of good, wouldn't that be, wouldn't one way of arguing that be the, as I mentioned earlier, the collective? So like within the particular culture that you are, within the society that you exist in, wouldn't the collective subjective values form a more objective value for that particular community? And that could change from around the world in different cultures, but essentially you would have to, what would be viewed as good or what would be viewed as bad or evil or whatever would be based upon what people around you would view as those things collectively.
I would agree with that, but I'm not sure how Al feels about that. But I would definitely agree with that.
When you have a collective and all, you have a hard way of judging what is good or evil. If you want to look at it in a group stance, well, let me put it this way. You have two guys walking, through the mountains with a girl. They get stranded. The guys get horny. They rape the girl. It's good for the collective now, isn't it? Not necessarily overall good. So no, collectivism, I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, but now you've just taken out the cultures of the people involved and the actual true collectives that they came from. So you've just made a very small collective and gone, well, collectively it was good for the majority of that particular collective.
Numerous groups
But
that
they all have backgrounds, they all have history, they've all come from somewhere, and they're the collective that the collective virtue, let's call it, of where they've come from, would probably say that just raping that girl there is quite bad.
Certainly. Is it bad? Yes. Is it, even if one culture thinks it's great, female circumcision and all that, they think that stuff is great. And all.
Well, yeah, of course, you've
Is it
got
good for
cultures that would find it good.
I'm sure it's good for the amoral opportunists that, want to do things like that. It's very good for them. But it is not good and it is not virtuous.
Yeah, but let's extend it a bit then. So let's say, let's go back to the 1930s. There was certain collectives, certain nations, let's say the Nazis, and let's say other fascist states like Italy and Spain and Japan and things that that had a completely different idea of what was good. And they thought that ethnic cleansing and things like this was actually good, and there was and they were actually doing something good for society. But it wasn't good for the collective of Earth, because all the other nations all agreed that this was actually bad and this was actually harming, and that it was actually an action which was ethnic cleansing, killing off entire races of people, and hence we put a stop to it.
You were the one quoting the Old Testament, right?
They're the ones that thought that that was good. Okay.
I mentioned the Old Testament earlier. Yes, Alejandro.
No, I just kind of recently came in. But no, the Old Testament and all that,
I was addressing Katie.
ridiculous.
She brought up some Old Testament Bible quotes, which I regard as anti-Semitic.
Yes,
And
you
she
called me
said-
anti-Semitic for bringing up that in the Bible
Yes,
God had
yes,
said.
you're literally
supposedly said
condemning
certain
Nazis
things.
at the same time you're making points against, the
Well,
Old Testament
the thing is, they have the free will to do this, and all. They made the choice to do that, and all. Was it a bad choice? I think we all could agree, yes.
Well, how do you adequately account for the relation between this supposed objective virtues or goods and the evolutionary pressures that influence those moral judgments? How do you account for that?
That's actually a nice one there. Okay, so you're evolving. We've been evolving for how long? I don't know, 500,000 years or something like that, if not more.
Yeah, whatever. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
More or less.
The only thing that got us here, was our ability to compare proposed actions to an ideal standard. Okay, this wasn't genocides, or this wasn't somebody's woo-woo god in a book somewhere.
Right.
No, we took that, we compared it to an ideal standard. So there you go. That's what gave us our free will. We have the capability of doing that. Even dogs do.
Mm-hmm.
Dogs have free will.
So let me ask you this. So evolution entails a lot of suffering, a lot of the things that we see in the world. We've evolved to be murderers, but we've also evolved to be, saviors of lives, right? We're like a mixed bag. We're a paradox. All of this is a result of nature, of how we adapted over time. So was evolution, is all of those activities and behaviors a good then?
You're getting off in the weeds again here.
Well, maybe I
Does
just
that have
explained it a
anything
little
to do
complicated.
with, no. Does that have anything to do with free will? We might have evolved free will. I don't buy into this concept of a God creating it, but
Right.
no, we evolved it. That's what separates us from the animals. The Nazis, the ancient Christians, and all that, they behaved like animals. So there
Well,
we go.
we
get to
are
treat
we
them
are
like
animals, aren't we?
Yeah.
Aren't we animals?
above animals.
Above, I mean, labels like animals, that's kind of arbitrary anyways, languages like that. But we have in common, we eat shit, sleep, bleed, get sick, die, all of that shit, just like animals do, right?
Yeah, and
so
can
what
I just
about
also ask as well? So you're the one that's mentioning evolution, and the fact that we're evolving. How are we within evolution? How can we prove that we're higher than animals? What are you basing that on?
Scott's the one that brought that up. You take the floor for that one.
So I don't think. Do you know the answer, or do you just don't want to go down that route?
I was talking about free will. I don't know what direction that's going off.
I can answer that question
that
briefly.
We evolved free will, so that's what I'm drawing.
Now
on.
I can go ahead and address that, and then I'm going to go ahead and leave for time restraints.
Okay.
If we live in a materialistic universe, there is no distinction between humans and animals, and that is where we get organizations like PETA, and that's where we get a lot of these movements, which are basically nature worship, where they sacrifice human well-being for animal well-being, and taken to the extreme of the anti-human agenda, which they've even written about it. What's bad for humanity is good for everything else. So you get a very anti-human agenda for exactly that reason. If there is no God, we are nothing but animals.
Well, as an animal, I would say that I eat other animals.
Yeah, so do tigers.
So I don't.
That we are bad for for the planet. We like
Yeah.
the
Right,
one thing
so
that has caused more damage to this planet than
right, so we have
any
an
other living
anti-human.
thing is us.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I said. You know, if we go down that road, you know, if humans were winked out of existence today, then better for everyone else. So that is a goal, and that goal, exactly according to your own manifesto, is people are going to go in that direction. Oh, it's bad for humans. We better do that. That law is anti-human. Oh, we should definitely pass that law. Oh well, you know, Planned Parenthood, fund it. You know, fewer humans. At any rate, like I said, it's 2 hours. I've got to go ahead and take care of the rest of my life. You guys all have fun.
Okay. Thanks, Alejandro, for coming on again, man.
Have a good one.
Appreciate you.
Yep, I'm out in 32, so.
Okay, I got another.
Who was the determinist? I think that
Joshua,
was
I think.
Okay.
I think. Let him.
Yes, Joshua was the determinist.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree with certain parts of determinism, but I would sort of say I'm probably in between determinism and compatibilism. But
Kathy, can I ask you something about that?
Who?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Where does, you said that you think some things could be determined and all. Why would you say that?
In what sense? Like, I need a little bit more clarification on what you mean there, what you're asking.
Well, you said like you thought some things were determined. Were there any kind of like instances that, you think something's determined, like, hey, a guy's, born a guy instead of a woman. He's determined to do X or.
Well, these definitely like sort of so when I talk about determinism, I'm talking about like mainly influences and things. So we've got like biological influences, you've got neurological influences, psychological influences, and societal influences, as well as environmental influences as well. All of these influences lead to you being sort of determined to actually make certain choices or decisions in your life based up, based upon those influences that have taken place beforehand. Now, to you, you're in your own personal experiences, where I'd say that I'm more like sort of in the compatibilism as well. Is that to you in your own personal experience, you are actually experiencing free will. So even though you were determined to make those choices, you experience it as free will, and you're able to. So in that sense, it's sort of like an illusion.
What I've come to witness about things is, when it comes to like things that you're determined to do, like we all have jobs. Well, at least I hope we do. That job determines our hours and things like that. But I like the one that you said with culture, though. And I like with the culture will kind of determine, your outlook on life and things like that. But that most of that is people they didn't have any control. Their free will is stripped from them, like in those cases. It's not like a job. You could quit your job, but when you're growing up, your parents are going to determine, well, until you run away at least, what you're going to do. That's basically like having a gun to your head, so you can't really look at that as determinism. And there's this others forcing their will upon you.
Yeah, but in a sense, that is determinism, isn't it? I mean, you can frame it as, oh, someone's put a gun to your head. But if someone did put a gun to your head, then that's still determinism. They are determining what action you're going to take, or influencing that action that you're going to take. I mean, you may like decide not to, for whatever reason, for whatever influence made you do that. You could like sort of go against what they're saying. You get a bullet in your head, but
yes,
either way, the reality is determinism. The feeling or the experience that you're experiencing is free will.
They robbed those individuals of their free will.
Yeah, but did you ever have the free will in the first place? That's the thing, isn't it? That's what I'm saying, is that, the influence, it made it so that you only feel the free will, you only experience the free will. In reality, you didn't have the free will to begin with. So maybe they're robbing you of your sense of free will or something at that point.
They're flat out robbing you of it. And that's why, like, a lot of Christians turn into atheists after they get away from whatever woo-woo church they're involved with. And now that they don't have a gun to their head anymore, they're free. They have their free will back. Josh,
yes, but they were still influenced by the by what led them to where they are, what led them to their atheism. So they're still influenced. You know, I mean, I grew up a Jehovah's Witness. I'm still influenced by what I was taught as a kid. There's still certain parts of of that particular faith which still influence decisions that I make. And the things that led me, the abuse that I suffered and everything, that led me out of that particular religion, that still definitely influences where I am in my own experience.
Things will influence you. Josh, yeah, what do you think, though?
I'm sorry, I just got the tail end of that. I think in particular...
We'll probably loop back around on it, though.
So... when we look at, for instance, just like how Katie stated, it is definitely, I think that people feel that they have free will, right? Because they feel that the actions which they do, they have freely chosen. But then after, what we really see is that the brain in and of itself, based on the influences that it actually has, right, is then given to awesome dog.
Look at the dog. You're muted, Gray Nomad. You're muted. Couldn't hear you, but
right.
Just want to say, I think he's gonna have to jet, and we'll let him go. And then we've got someone else coming on here in a minute.
Yeah, I've got to go. Let's do this again, guys.
Yeah, we'll do it, man.
Oh no.
All right, man. We'll see you guys.
Bye.
Uh-oh, I think Joshua froze.
I froze.
There you go.
There we go. I'm
right.
back. My bad, everybody.
All right.
No, so I think that we believe that we have free will, but the reality of it is that, just like how Katie stated, it's determined. And it's because of the influences that we get through the stimulus that we encounter on the outside, and let alone because I'm a behavioral, I lean more on behavioralism also. So behavioralism is predominantly a reaction to the stimulus that you have, right? So
if I could jump in.
Pardon?
Yeah, like I was going to say, in line with what you just said, I think that part of the problem is because we don't know the future. We don't know what the outcome's really going to be with our behaviors and our thoughts. It feels like free will. I mean, that's my opinion. It just seems like not knowing what's going to happen, at any given point in time, gives us this illusion of free will. But in fact, we could just be going through the motions and our mind is catching up. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of telling a story. We're kind of telling a narrative.
But that's the beautiful thing. I think that because you hit it right on the head. And I apologize. Actually, you know what? Finish your thought.
That's it. That's exactly all I had to say on that.
Because you hit something really, really, really interesting based on the human experience right on the head. Storytelling. We are a race of beings, the human beings in and of itself, that live for the story, right? And every time we interact with each other, we build this story out of, it's not even out of the framework. It's not even just out of the ether. What it is that through our interactions with our environment, we meld a story towards that said stimulus, which we have, right? And from there, which is really interesting, is that for us, the idea is that if it has a certain amount of credibility, then we can delve into it. Then we can say that this might be possible, And
Perfect.
through it being possible, what ends up happening is that we build the story and we tell other people that said don't.
Yeah,
Right?
that actually
Even
made.
though that full story isn't the entirety, or sometimes it can be fragmented.
Yeah,
I
that
want to
actually
introduce.
brings me on to. Oh, sorry, I'll let you introduce thing, and then I'll
Yeah,
bring up this.
I just want to introduce before we keep going on, Diesel, who is Isaiah, my little partner here in crime. He identifies as a Christian. And before we go on, what do you think about everything you've heard so far, man?
I have been listening, but I do want to say I did just wake up here because it's the morning in South Korea, so I may not be completely coherent. But then again, I'm not always completely coherent when I'm totally awake, so that's not really saying much. But I thought that was interesting what you just said, Scott, because as a Christian, I think it is a bit of a paradox because I at first glance, it doesn't even seem that free will is even possible. Like it seems like an impossibility. Now it might be true, but if I start to analyze it more like philosophically and religiously, it doesn't, like whenever you throw in the God, here's the problem. Whenever you throw in the God factor, it starts to seem like that becomes less and less a likelihood. And I don't know, for me, it seems like, in my own personal opinion, what seems the most logical is that because it says that God creates everything, he creates the good and the bad. It ultimately seems like at the end of the day, kind of like a Hinduistic idea of God, of him just being like everything. That really seems like inescapable. Like, honestly, as much as I would like to escape that, it seems like that's just the reality, that God is everything. We're just small manifestations of it. Because he's infinite.
Right. That's interesting. Okay, Katie, go ahead. I just wanted to introduce Isaiah and get his 2 cents, and please continue.
Yeah, hi Isaiah. Nice
Hi,
to
Katie.
be chatting with you again.
Likewise.
Been a long time. Yeah, no. What my point I was wanting to bring up was just to add on to what Josh was saying, because it just reminded me of something I was looking into the other day to do with near-death experiences, and how this sort of ties in. Because what was interesting is they were doing some trying to prove whether or not near-death experiences were actually happening, whether people were actually leaving the body and were actually experiencing the things that they were saying that they were experiencing outside the body. And it actually turns out that this has not been proven, that they cannot prove that these people are actually leaving the body. Instead, what appears to be the case is that we as humans, as pattern-solving machines, have actually created the stories for the missed time that was taking place. So we actually created really in-depth experiences based upon everything that we would expect to happen and choices that we would expect to be making and things like that, which sort of adds a bit of credence to this whole determinism thing over the free will. Because if our brains are actually able to create entire pieces of our lives that never actually happened, and we believe them fervently that these things actually did happen, then how can we even be sure that the choices that we're making are actually based upon free will and aren't just determined for us prior, and then we're just experiencing the illusion of free will?
Yeah, because consciousness could be kind of like an afterglow, in a way. Like, we have this experience, and really, to be quite honest with you, any experience is sort of ineffable. The fact that we're even conscious, looking at something and seeing colors, seeing meaning, all of these things, that is kind of ineffable. So when we speak, we're kind of telling a story. We're kind of post hoc telling a story to explain away what our experience meant or was or whatever. Kind of like a dream or kind of like a memory. We know that over time you can create memories. You're adding on top of it because your story is getting embellished, and the longer out it is, the less reliable the story is about the memory, right? So it's sort of, so to put it in spiritual terms, if I could use that word, that would be kind of like a mystical thing, like an ineffable is just an experience, but trying to explain it, trying to put words on it is never going to do it justice. It's always going to be incoherent somewhere. It's going to fail somewhere, and it's going to be debunked every time, because you can never explain an experience in its total, in its full measure, right? So then in more scientific terms, this could just be the brain essentially telling a story, basically just reflecting a thought about a thought, if you will.
Exactly. And I'll let Diesel. I'll let Diesel speak. But after when he's done, I want to chime into what both of you stated, because
okay,
I think
perfect.
I got something to build on top of that as well.
Yeah, Katie, that was very interesting what Katie was just talking about those out-of-body experiences. And it did remind me of something. Did you ever see the movie The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
No, I didn't. I'm not a big movie
person. Okay, so I want to get into spoilers, but this is taking place in his mind as they're trying to delete the memories of his ex-girlfriend, Kate Winslet. And as they're doing this, he starts interacting with her, and they start having all these dialogues and stuff. And it gives you the illusion, like if you're just watching it, that this is taking place like in real time, and they're having these regrets about their relationship. But the reality is, like, everything is taking place in his mind. And so these are just his interpretations of what has happened in this relationship. And so it's kind of like, I guess, kind of like his mind hallucinating. But the reality is that there's, especially kind of like what you're just talking about right now, Scott, is like, we really don't know the true extent of everything and reality and everything that's going on. So for us to fully say we do have free will or we don't, I think is honestly beyond our limits of understanding. We clearly have the illusion of that, like day to day. But the true nature of reality, I think we're all just taking our best stabs in the dark. And they're interesting talks to have, that's for sure. But I certainly don't think, as a frail human, as someone who's even a Christian, that I'm going to be able to fully understand this problem. But guys, I'm going to get some coffee, so I'm going to take myself. I'm going to mute myself. Okay. But I'll be listening. How do I mute?
Right, okay. Sounds like a plan. So I think one really interesting thing, and Al, if you're there, alive end, then we can definitely, because there was something that you stated, but I forget. So I might need you to repeat what you stated beforehand. I do apologize. But before I delve into that, I want to build off of what Katie and Scott stated, because there's also another thing that when people talk about consciousness, right? People have a certain hierarchy, just like the other guy who left stated that there's a hierarchy of consciousness. But actually, because if you look at Anil Seth's book, Being You, for instance, he says that consciousness isn't like a scale. It's a fluid type of thing where there's like points all over the map, where it's very difficult in certain instances to really understand the way where consciousness really is.
It's not really local. It's not local. Consciousness is all over the place.
Brain, but the idea that he's trying to state is that, like, if somebody is a vegetable, does that mean that they are unconscious, or does that mean that they have a certain level of consciousness to them? And if that extent of, they have a certain level of consciousness, just like of you being put underneath, let's just say, the knife at a doctor's office, right? And then you're still cognizant in sometimes where you're able to hear things, right? And through hearing, because what is the whole entire point of storytelling is that you also hear. Is based on or not orientation, it's based on oral tradition, right? So while you're underneath the anesthetic, At the same exact time, you're hearing what the doctors are stating, you're creating a story, and from that story, it seems that you're having an out-of-body experience. But it's actually psychologically what it's actually called.
Can I add? I'm just itching to add something real quick. I don't mean to jump in, but here's my view is that I think that, you know, this idea of leaving your body is kind of a misnomer, even to the people that talk about it that way. I think that your brain has a way of mapping your body. That's how you know where your arm is. You can mentally know where your left, your right, you know, your small toe, your big toe. So you have a mental map of your body. Well, there's parts of your brain that actually shut down. And so you have this disconnected impression of being disconnected from your body. So you're kind of outside your body. You're not really outside of anything, because that's just an illusion. That's just like your brain is really just like, there is no outside inside when it comes to consciousness, because consciousness isn't a thing. It isn't, it's a process. It's what the brain does, not what it is. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that that's where the language fails us when we start talking about these things. Now, the experience itself, I'm willing to grant people's experience. Like, I know 100% I have experiences of different things under hallucinogens, when I smoke weed, if I get drunk off beer, wine, whatever. I have a quality of an experience, right? I know that that's real. But when I go back to explain how I felt, I may not be fully explaining anything, you know, because I don't.
Right.
I don't think consciousness really exists. I don't think it exists at all. I think it's real, but it doesn't exist. You know what I mean?
It's the awareness that the brain has of its environment, its surroundings, and the stimulus which it interacts with. That's if we really break it down, that is what consciousness really is. And let alone the electromagnetic firing of neurons within the brain. That's why and I think you're the one that discussed this beforehand, Scott, but with the God helmet, right? But not only just with the God helmet, but even with other ways that you could stop actual neuronic fire in certain points of the brain in order to hinder people from actually thinking certain things to begin with. So you can actually shut down certain thought processes that people actually have just based on the magnetic influence on the brain in and of itself.
I think Al wants to jump in really quick. He hasn't said anything in a minute.
Jump in. I was just making an observation. No, please. I'm sitting out on things that I don't know much on, so please continue.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I did want to jump in,
sure,
because we were just talking about like the self and things like that there, Scott, and I think a good example of like the difference between like, you know, the inherent part of our brain, the actual neurons firing, and then the product of our consciousness, which is produced from the brain. I think a good example of that is like sort of someone within my situation. So, you know, for the viewers there, I'm a trans person. I'm a trans woman, and I think it's very hard. One of the things that we have a lot of difficulty getting people to understand, obviously, is this idea of the self, of this identity that we hold, and people seem to think that it's just something that we are fully in control of, something that we can actually choose, that we have the free will to actually change, that we were living as, say, I'm a trans woman, so I was living as a man in their view. Because that's what I was inherently born as. That was my biology. And then at some point, I just chose to be to pretend to be a woman or something. But that's not actually the experience that that people like me experience, and it's not what the biologists and the psychologists actually say is actually happening. What is actually proven to be happening is that there is a part of our brain which can be shown under an fMRI scan, that we actually are different to what we would be expected to be born as. So those scans match more closely with the gender identity that we have. So when we're talking about the experience, like the experience of the identity that I have, it's not free will. It was determined. And I think that's quite a good little, a good example of what we're talking about here.
Oh
Very
yeah.
good example.
Can I say I'm actually a Christian and actually have a lot of. I actually agree with a lot with what you said, because from especially I know this is not the same thing, but a lot of gay people I've met, they've all told me they've known they were gay at like from 5 years old. So I mean that doesn't seem like they've had any kind of choice in it. And so for me as a Christian, it causes me a huge level of cognitive dissonance, because I have to conclude at the end of the day, like, this is the way that they were made. Like, either God deliberately did it to fuck with them, or he just created them as a part of creation like this. Because we certainly know that about like intersex people. And I hate to lump you in with because I know they're just distinct things, but for me, I observe these things, and this is like clearly just a part of the spectrum in which God has created. So it seems. Sorry.
I don't actually view I don't really view much of a difference between intersex and transgender that much. I mean, there is some evidence coming out now that well, not evidence, but like sort of ways of thinking. There's certain theories that are coming out within neuroscience that say that intersex and transgender identities are actually very similar to each other. It's just another end of the spectrum. So you've got different traits within biology, biological sex, which can differ from each other, and at any point those can differ. Intersex is just is like the physical parts, the primary sexual characteristics, and transgender is just the brain, the secondary sexual characteristic of the brain's identity.
So, Katie, can I ask you just one question then? Because I've heard this mostly answered one way, but I've also heard it answered in a way that has completely flipped my understanding of transgenderism with people. Because I've heard a lot of trans people say that, like, this is something you wouldn't wish upon, like, your worst enemy, because it winds up becoming like it is something you wouldn't choose to do deliberately, you know? So, like, if you genuinely had a choice, you had a free will, and you could have been chosen to be a cisgender man or female, what would you have chosen? Or would you have just chosen to be born transgender? I'm curious about that.
A man. I was born with a male body. Things would just be way easier if I was able just to be, for lack of a better word, normal, like, you know, the same as everybody else. I mean, I'm losing something by not actually having the body that I was, and the existence that I was meant to that I was meant to have. You know, I'm actually losing something there. So it would be way easier just to be able to choose to be a man. And for many years, I tried that. I tried to be that way, but you know, it just was never going to work.
Yeah.
Wow.
Quick.
That's deep.
You know,
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah. You know what? I agree with you on that. You cannot determine your genetics. That when you say determinism, you know, we're talking about the path laid out for our lives, I guess is what we were, you know, the title of the show was. But there are some things that, like your genetics, you cannot determine that. And you had a gun to your head most of the time until society changed. You know, we're not living, you know, in a Southeast Asia country where that's, you know, the norm and all for stuff like that to happen. And but now that we are accepting of it, and all you didn't have a gun to your head anymore, you have your free will, so you just rolled with it.
Go ahead, Josh.
Because for me, like, I would state a question over that. Is it that you have your free will now because the gun is not to your head, or are you just following the determined path? And because you're now able to follow that determined path, you're now able to be the self that you were determined to be.
Yes, that's a very good point. That is, Josh. I mean, like in from my own experiences, with my life is like, I had the influences when I was a kid. Obviously there was a thing that's known within psychology and sociology, known as forced certification. So this is the idea that from the day that we're born, that our parents and society as a whole is influencing us to follow a certain set of characteristics, to follow a certain societal role of gender, and that is something which I myself experienced a lot of, especially growing up in quite a fundamentalist church as well, Jehovah's Witnesses. So I couldn't be myself. I couldn't be what I was determined to be, as you put it there, Josh. And no matter how much my genetics or my biology or whatever was pushing to try and to have me live the life that I'm supposed to live, that I was determined to live, those outside influences were forcing me, for my own safety, to have to do something which was bringing me a lot of distress. Now,
speaking of which,
that distress ended and that those outside influences ended, didn't mean that all of a sudden I had the free will to be able to choose that. I was still being influenced by the genetics and the biology and the in a sense predetermined aspects of my life. Yeah. Sorry.
Speaking of Jehovah's Witnesses, they came by my house today.
Oh,
but I guess they were determined not to come in and talk to me.
Oh no, they've got a rule now. They're not allowed. They're not allowed.
You didn't invite them in for some beer and stuff? Come on.
I did. I invited them in, and they refused.
So. Oh, those in the Mormon.
Did you offer them some sticky icky?
No. I knew that would run them away because they're so.
Wait, Scott, were you saying they couldn't come into your house?
They were determined not to because of the rules.
Yeah, they're not
because you've defected.
No, it's unsafe for them to go into people's homes, so they just hang out outside nowadays.
Yeah,
okay. I didn't know that.
Was it last year or the year before the convention? They said that they have to be in eyesight of each other now whenever they're on the door-to-door work. So.
Right.
Yeah,
which because I really wanted to get in it with them, man.
Oh, I know.
you
And
could have had it in front of the on like your porch or something, you know. I always do that. Jehovah's Witness come through or the Mormons come through. I'm like, here, you know what? I got a seat. Come and sit down.
Get
Let's
the
have a
chairs out. Yeah.
Put
the umbrella
up.
up.
I should have done that. Yeah, should have done that.
That's an interesting thing that came up, though, with like a cross between what is determined and what is free will. And the thing is, like a lot of us, our DNA is programmed a particular way. I'll never be black or a bodybuilder, whatever. But, there's other things in life that you absolutely have, free will to choose your destiny, basically. And I think that's where the water gets really muddied up. And some people are just too over influenced by determinism, and so I don't know, where's the happy medium? I think
it comes down to definitions and interpretations. You define it as free will, whereas we would define it as the illusion of free will in a sense, and that there was the influences behind that. It's basically, we're talking about exactly the same thing. It's just the way we interpret that reality.
Right. And I want to, and speaking of that, if you don't mind, this calls to mind something that Al reminded me of that maybe shed a little light on the conversation for where we're at right now, especially with what he just asked. But let me play this a little bit. Go ahead.
Oh, hold on 1 second. Hey, I appreciate the food for thought, guys. As much as I love to hang out with you, godless you godless scumbags. I do got to be a good boy and go to church. So no, seriously, thank you guys all for the talk. I'll be listening, but I have to go. Josh,
no problem, man.
Thank you for your feedback, and Katie, I look forward to interviewing you on my channel. That was very touching what you said to me. that's going to be something I'll be thinking about probably for the rest of the day. So, yeah, you guys have a good one,
man.
Yeah.
And also sing
Bye-bye.
loud enough so the angels hear you.
Yeah. Well, check this out. This kind of, we're talking about determinism. What is determined? Genetics, stuff like that. This might be pretty interesting. Check this out.
People tend to think of intelligence as being of two kinds. There is the quote unquote real intelligence, which is what we are supposed to have. And then there's this idea of a collective intelligence. So swarms of bees, colonies of ants, shoals of fish, and so on. And people tend to think of those as radically different things. But the reality is all intelligence is collective intelligence. And this is because we are all made of parts. So you and I are collections of cells, and these cells, including neurons and various other cells in our body, have many competencies. This is because they were once separate individuals by themselves. They were unicellular organisms with all of the skills needed to survive in a complex world. And that journey that we all took, those progressive steps by which we construct ourselves, we construct our bodies, we construct our minds, that journey is maybe the most profound question in all of science. I'm Michael Levin, and I'm a developmental biologist at Tufts University. Developmental biology is maybe the most magical of all sciences because you get to see with your own eyes that journey that we all take from physics to mind. We all start out life as an unfertilized oocyte, and then slowly, gradually, step by step, that oocyte turns into a bunch of cells that self-construct an embryo, and eventually that embryo matures and becomes a large-scale adult. In the case of a human, it will be an individual with metacognitive capacities and the ability to reason, but we all have our origin in that chemistry and physics of that initial oocyte. And the magic of developmental biology is that there is a mechanism by which all of these cells get together and they are able to cooperate towards large-scale goals. This is the notion that biology uses what I call a multi-scale competency architecture, which basically means that we are not simply nested structurally in terms of cells, which comprise tissues, comprising organs, the bodies, and then ultimately societies and so on. That's obviously true on a structural level. But more interesting is the fact that each of these layers has certain problem-solving competencies. Each one solves problems in their own space. So cells are simultaneously solving problems in physiological spaces and metabolic spaces and gene expression spaces, and tissues and organs are solving those problems. But for example, during embryogenesis or regeneration, they're also solving problems in anatomical space. They're trying to navigate a path from the shape of an early embryo or a fertilized zygote all the way up to the complexity of a human body with all of the different types.
So he's gonna get into whether this is determined or whether these cells actually think about this stuff and actually make decisions, make mistakes sometimes, what have you. And this kind of goes to what we were talking about earlier, or what Al was mentioning.
Of organs and structures. So the competency architecture refers to the fact that all of the parts inside of us and inside of all other creatures are themselves competent agents with preferences, with goals, with various abilities to pursue those goals, and other types of problem-solving capacities. What evolution has given us is this remarkable architecture where every level shapes the behavioral landscape of the levels below, and the levels below do clever and interesting things that allow the levels above not to have to micromanage and to be able to control in an interesting top-down capacity. One of the most important things about this emerging field of diverse intelligence is that we as humans have very limited capacity and finely honed ability to see intelligence in medium-sized objects moving at medium speeds through three-dimensional space. So we see other primates and we see crows and we see dolphins, and we have some ability to recognize intelligence. But we really are very bad at recognizing intelligence in unconventional embodiments, where our basic expectations strain against this idea that there could be intelligence in something extremely small or extremely large. People often criticize this approach by saying, well, then anything goes. If you can pick up a rock and say, I think this rock is cognitive and intelligent, there's a spirit with hopes and dreams inside of every rock. That's not what this is. This is quite different. As an engineer, what you have to do is you have to come up with a way to look at a particular system that doesn't overestimate its intelligence or underestimate its intelligence. If you treat complex animals as if they were clockwork, you're going to miss everything that's important and exciting about how they work. If you treat a clock as if it had a complex intelligence, you're going to waste a lot of time. But getting it right is fundamentally important. And so you have this spectrum where the engineer has to pick the right level for the right system. And it's critical not to then say, well, that doesn't sound like human intelligence. Right, we're looking for the basic minimal version. So I think it should have two things. The first thing it should have is some degree of goal-directedness, some ability to take different paths to get to the same goal. So this is William James's definition of intelligence. And it has to have some ability to undertake actions that are not completely determined by local circumstances. So you start with all of that, and systems that have scaled up those basic, very fundamental, non-zero levels of agency, we call that life. So it is a spectrum, and I think that in this universe, it goes all the way to the bottom. It's very hard for people to think about these unconventional kinds of intelligences that may be either too large or too small. And of course, they often work in other spaces. So we're good with three-dimensional space, but imagine if we had a primary sense of our own blood chemistry. If you could feel your blood chemistry the way that you currently see and smell and taste things that are around you, I think we would have absolutely no problem having an intuitive understanding of physiological state space, the way we do for three-dimensional space. I think that we would immediately be able to recognize our various internal organs as intelligent agents navigating that space and solving these kind of problems, all the various things that happen during the day. And here's one of my favorite examples of problem solving in physiological and transcriptional spaces. So we have these worms, these are planaria, these are flatworms. And if you put these flatworms in a solution of barium. Barium is a non-specific potassium channel blocker. It blocks the ability of these cells to exchange potassium with the outside world. The cells really don't like it, especially cells in the head, because the head is full of neurons. Neurons love to pass potassium. And so what happens is that overnight their heads explode. Literally, it's called head deprogression. They literally lose their heads. But if you leave them in the barium, within a couple of weeks, they grow back a new head. And the new head is completely barium adapted, has no problem with the barium whatsoever. We said, how could this be? We looked at the original heads, the original naive heads. We looked at the barium adapted heads, and we simply did a subtraction and asked, what are the different genes that are expressed here? And we found out that the barium adapted heads have just a small number of genes that were turned on and off to allow them to adapt to this novel stressor. Now, here's the amazing part. Planaria never see barium in the wild. There's no evolutionary history of knowing what to do when you're hit with barium. This is not an ecological stressor that they normally have to deal with. So just imagine you're a bunch of cells and you're hit with this incredible physiological stressor you've never seen before. You've got tens of thousands of genes. What do you do? How do you know which genes to turn on and off? You don't have time to try combinations. You don't have time for an exhaustive search. You don't have time for hill climbing. You don't have time to try random things because you'll probably kill the cell long before you solve the problem. And yet you were able to navigate from where you are to where you need to be to escape.
So this is kind of going to how does determinism fit into this scenario that he's describing? Sorry, I had to pause it just because I don't want to get shut down. So I'm kind of just giving it a minute.
I want to see when this dude's going to bust out Genesis.
Yeah, let's see.
This physiological stressor. And so what I think evolution has done is pivoted some of the same tricks from very simple systems that only solve metabolic problems, eventually to physiological, and then to transcriptional problems. And when multicellularity comes on the scene, large-scale anatomical problems. And so it's never a question of, is something physics and chemistry or is it cognitive? The question is, what kind of cognition and how much?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting.
That was actually pretty legit. But I think
it's quite fun as well, exploding heads of things.
Right?
That's got to be a good job, hasn't it?
But I actually see that part of determinism. I think that it's all part of a deterministic mindset. Not mindset, but
so do I. So do I, because when there's another video, I can't keep playing videos, but there's another video where he says, well, where are they getting the information in order to know how to get to their goals? Like what is the mechanism that provides all that? And what he's talking about is not, some Holy Spirit or God or anything like that. He's saying that it's called bioelectricity, which is a pattern in nature. So basically all cells, all biology is pulling from the laws of nature to get these things, to determine these directions. Right. Absolutely. And it's just like we do, just like we think of solutions. It's not because we have necessarily libertarian free will, but it's just because we're pulling from nature, you know.
Right, but again, flatworms are also extremely, how could I say it? They're very adaptable to their environment, and let alone they are known to grow back portions of their bodies to even such a great to a great extent, right? And one of the issues that I see is that with something that is able to adapt, because flatworms also live in environments which are extremely hostile environments. So their adaptability to situations is much more, how can I say
They
it?
have a higher threshold or whatever.
Exactly.
Right.
And they also have a higher sense of adaptability towards nouveau environments. Right. So if they have a greater adaptability to nouveau environments, it would make sense that their head would regrow.
So what do you say to that, Al? What would you think about that? If there's free, or I don't, you know, is what he's saying that determinism is still kind of ruling the day here, or what do you think?
Well, in that case of the flatworms, yeah, absolutely, because they don't have free will and all. They don't have the capacity to do that and all. They are, you know, just like, you know, he mentioned cells earlier, and the flatworms more complex creature and everything, but no, they don't have free will. They don't have choice. They're just adapting to a particular environment. I think, you know, Kathy and I touched on that a little earlier. And all these, you know, there are certain, you know, things in whatever creatures in life. You don't want to call them animals. I don't want to cut teeth, but they don't have the ability to make decisions and all that, like I put in the chat and all. You know, the free will does not involve something that all they can do is, you know, have sex and procreate.
But these things are deciding novel solutions to novel problems, right?
No,
they're making decisions, but they're not making choices.
They're surviving.
Like, there's something that I learned within sociology, a sociology course, which I was doing last year from a university, and that is the distinction between choice and decision. And I think that's quite an important thing that we can bring into this conversation. So a decision is something which is based upon influences that that you're experiencing. So influences from other people, influences from society, whatever those influences are. You're not necessarily making a choice there, because you're just making a decision. Whereas the choice is something which could be separate from a decision.
Okay, so from what you know, and I've looked at this guy's work, right, Michael Levin, and he's always saying that, you know, cells and collections of cells are intelligent. Like they're intelligent in the sense of the cybernetic sense. They're coming up with decisions among different options, and they're deciding one over another. That's what he's showing. Like
No,
even
they're
with
not. They're adapting. They're not making decisions. They're surviving, and
I'm just saying that's what Michael Levin is saying. And he's a biologist. I'm not.
Okay.
So
Are they
he could be
creative?
wrong, you know.
Are they creative?
Yes.
No. What do they create?
Solutions. They're finding creative solutions out of environmental pressures, from what this guy's
Did
is
they
talking
create anything other than what they are programmed to do?
I would say yes, because there's some experiments that this guy, and I don't want to keep pulling up these videos. Maybe I will, but he's got one experiment where he actually introduces say growth. He's able to make certain worms grow heads in the wrong area, or frogs to grow limbs in the wrong, or eyes in their toes, simply by disrupting. But it's disrupt.
That's
adaptation. Right, it's kind of,
I think we have to be careful when we bring in programming here. Like, I don't think that this guy is saying that these things are programmed to do things a certain way. think what he's saying is that they, based upon stimuli that they're experiencing, that they are that they are making decisions based upon that.
Right,
They're not making choice because they don't have free will, but and like whether a free will even exists or not is the discussion that we're having tonight. But yeah, like they are making decisions based upon the stimuli they have. They're sort of affecting their own. They're creating their own programming in that sense.
Which goes to my point that I think we are too, in a way. We just think we have this free will choice making thing, but we're just adapting, right?
Well,
we're just kind of doing the same thing, right?
I would completely agree. I'll let Alive jump in, and after I'll just run with the ball.
Okay.
Okay. Did they create something out of nothing?
No, neither do we.
Yeah, define nothing. That's what I would say there.
Look at your phone.
No, I mean define nothing, as in like define what is nothing. Like this is something that science itself has not been able to define.
Right.
There's no such thing as nothing.
I didn't say. I said something.
Creating something out of what?
I see where you're getting.
Yeah,
creating something. No. What he's saying is, does it create something out of something?
Yeah, something out of something. Yeah,
something out of something. I think that's what he's trying to say.
No, and they have not. And they're a virus. Viruses, adapt, they mutate, and things like that. And all it is a survival technique. Humans don't do that.
There's a difference between viruses and bacteria, and also like cells and genes and RNA and those type of things. There are two distinct differences, because viruses over time and stuff like that, like, yes, they adapt, but the thing is that they're not something that can create complex structure actually, let me rephrase that. They're not something that is able to become multicellular in a way that can then create beings. That's what I should say. And even that's incorrect, the way that I fucking worded it, but I'm a little tired here, so
none of us were prepared, but no, it's just okay.
But I understand what you're saying.
I
think I agree with what you're trying to say.
Yeah, they're determined with a specific set of parameters. Okay, and we can't compare us to them, because we have the capability to create, and we have the ability to go well outside of our standard, that we should not be in space.
Isn't that a learned ability, though, that we've learned through the influences that we've had throughout our evolution? From
why did we accelerate? Why do we accelerate so fast? Because we had that magical thing, and all.
We accelerate so fast because that's just how it works. As you progress, that progression speeds
exponential.
Up. We can see that in the computer industry. The more advanced the computers become, the faster those computers are developing. They're developing at such a rate that we can't even keep up with the developments of those computers. Hence AI. That's just the way it's what's the word?
Exponential.
Exponential. That's the one. Yeah. It's an exponential progression, and that's what we are as humans.
So we have the ability, to exceed and take off, I guess, like a rocket. All right, that's fair enough. And all, but do these things have free will? Can they create an environment out of a brand new environment, that they can live in and everything else? No.
Well, I think what you're asking there is exactly the same as what we've been asking all night. It's the same for them as it is for us. I mean, do we have free will? Do they have free will? It's exactly the same question.
We're made up of them,
We are. But again, can these things change their environment? No.
No, of course not. But when they get together, when they collect, see, that's the whole idea about collective intelligence. The more that they collect, the higher order emerges out of that collection a higher order sense of intelligence, which empowers you to do different things. That's why we can do things that a chimp can't, because we're a higher order of intelligence.
Why aren't we on a world like Starship Troopers?
I wish I knew why that.
And you say, can they change
I
their
just got some laser tag gear, by the way, too.
You mentioned there, can they change their environment? Like, so can you change your environment? Like, and control it? Can you change your environment without any influence from anywhere, from you, from yourself, from other people, from society, from your biology, whatever? Can you change your environment without any of those influences? Because if you can prove that, then you've proven free will.
Could I have done this without other people, teaching me and learning off their knowledge?
Right.
Yes.
Possibly. I learned philosophy on my own, and then I was really disappointed when I found out people figured this out thousands of years ago. But
yes, then again, what led you to go and learn philosophy on your own? Like, that's not exactly the same. You
had to learn to read.
That led you to that.
Yeah, you had to learn to read different skills in order to engage in the whole form.
But again, that's where we were programmed up to a point, and we all have our limitations and all that. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we're programmed up to a point, but whatever it is that we evolved into, I'm not going to say God, this all that other garbage, but whatever we evolved into, this is like one thing that makes us so unique from the animal kingdom and all that is we have the ability, like I said, to compare proposed actions to ideal standards. These things don't.
Right. No one's. I don't think anyone's. I don't think anybody's saying they do. But go ahead.
Are you talking like a sense of ethics, sort of thing, an ideal standard, like the virtue of like ethics and stuff? Like we're able to like sort of do things for the that will benefit ourselves or benefit others.
What is right?
So, like you say, that's what separates us. Do dolphins not do that? Do elephants not do that?
They're like ants. They have their group, preferences, like you stated earlier. But no, they don't.
Although we have evidence to say the contrary. We have evidence to say that they actually do have empathy, that they are actually showing empathy, and that they are actually doing things for this collective good, for this greater good, this virtue in a sense. They're doing things that based upon their own understanding of what is good and what is bad. I mean, dolphins can even do it towards other species, not just towards their own little group. They do it towards humans who are trapped out at sea and things like that. Even our own pets, our dogs and things. They show empathy towards us. We're not even of the same species of them.
No, they don't. They just know that that's the best survival technique. All we're doing when we
really. So when a dog, I was watching a video the other day, right? I was watching a video the other day, and there was a little girl who was about to get attacked by another dog. Yeah, this dog was running up, barking its head off, wanting to. The really angry dog. Yeah, and the family dog, which ran across the entire field to go and attack this other dog, not to protect itself, to protect the little girl. Now, you can't tell me that that's not empathy, that it did not see the situation where it needed to protect a member of its pack, even though that the member of its pack was not its species.
You're right. It's protecting its own interest. And the thing
is, I think
when we look at those people, when we look at animals and we try to compare them to the way that we react, all we're trying to do is project ourselves into them. And they're completely incapable of doing that because they can't project it back towards us. The way they act is one thing.
Now, I'm going to get a bit controversial. Just a tad bit. You know me, Scott. I would actually just in order to bring it all back to, does morality exist? Because I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about virtues. We have a sense of that morality. And you know what I would say? Absolutely not. Morality, now, why do I say that? Because most of the times, human beings, what we act upon is what we want. And mostly the beneficial thing for us is to create a society that actually protects our own interests.
And call it morality, right?
Exactly. And we call it morality. But the reality of the situation is that why do you think that individuals who, let's just say, I don't know, who want to attack other people, kill other people, and everything like that aren't in charge? Is because the individuals who make up the majority of the population has more might than those particular individuals. However, if those individuals came to power because they had more people than we did, it doesn't matter based on what kind of morality that we have. The same thing with the Nazis. It didn't matter that there was some Germans that didn't agree with. Okay, there we go. I'm back. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if certain Germans didn't agree on certain Nazi policy. The Nazis were in charge, so they didn't care about right made right. And that is all what morality is seriously based on. Whoever has the most people that agree with one certain thing collectively is the mightier of the smaller groups and smaller individuals which do not agree with that.
It's kind of like the silverback gorilla theory, where they say that the silverback gorilla is worshipped as the authority and whatever he says goes. And so we humans, we kind of make God this big silverback gorilla, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
Could I say something?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Oh, please jump in.
There's things kind of get confused. I've noticed this big time with the theist. All right, there's a major difference between morals and ethics. Okay, morals are internal. Whatever you feel, that is your moral. Ethics, on the other hand, a whole different story. So I agree with you, Josh. You know, the Nazis thought that they were doing good because, well, they were amoral.
No, actually, what they were looking at is that their idea in and of itself, which is really messed up, but at the same exact time, you could kind of see where they got most of the people to agree with them, is that they looked at everybody who had quote unquote money, right? And what did they point at? The bankers. And what did they say? Who were the most people who had that money? Were individuals, sadly, that they thought was the case were Jewish individuals, which was absolutely fucking asinine of them to even think. But because of that supposed, like, oh, okay, the secrecy aspect of the orthodoxy, and let alone how the money would come around based on banks and stuff like that, that was how they were able to pinpoint on their enemy, right? If you're ambiguity, if you have ambiguity, and let alone, it seems that you're the ones that are running the monetary system, you're the ones that are running the globalized system, whatever the fuck that is, then obviously the number one thing is that people are going to start demonizing a particular group of people. And henceforth, they would think that this is the best way in order to move forward, is to remove those individuals from society and stuff like that. I'm not talking about the Holocaust. I'm talking about, because even beforehand, what they wanted to do is remove by like moving them out of Germany.
Oh man,
that was the initial plan. Then once World War II started to fail in 1942, that's when they activated the final solution. But
they went crazy. But they started off slow, but boy did they end bad. But the thing is, they're, you know, like let's just use everybody, even the listeners, you know, to the podcast here.
Let's do it.
We all have morals, okay? And my morals, I can't even sit in my damn apartment every day and not think about some person annoying me and wanting to kill them. And to me, I can morally justify that. But is it ethically justifiable? No. But I have
no.
I would disagree. You say that everybody has morals. I don't believe I have morals. I really don't. When I understand morals as whether you're religious or whether you're secular, it doesn't really matter. If you've got morals, it's this idea that you've got like the right and wrong is sort of inherent to is like built into the universe somehow, whether it's provided by a god or whether it's just something, just some.
Yeah, that's where the water gets muddy because they confuse the
whereas.
two. Yes.
Yeah. Well, so I don't believe I actually have morals based upon that. I base everything that I go by, right and wrong, upon the ethics itself, just the ethics.
All right, we'll use like the Christians. That's a good example. All right, they call morals and they think that that's a behavior. No, that morals are what are internal. Okay, how you act on those is a different story. That's your ethics. And you have the free will to choose. Hey, do I want to go kill my neighbor because the battery in her smoke detector has been going off for 2 days? Well, that's your ethical part. You have the choice to do that or not.
Actually, I would state the opposite, right? Because most of the time, I think individuals would do much worse if we didn't have society there to begin with, right? I think that morals and ethics, let alone, come from society and the laws that society has brought down upon us. So a lot of individuals, I think, there are thoughts that go through their heads that they want to do something, but the number one thing is that what they start thinking is, oh shit, this is going to bite me in the ass if I get caught. So the number one thing is that they back away and say, you know what, no, and they make it as though it is based on their inner compass, right? But if you, like, let's just say if tomorrow, I don't know, the electricity goes out, the electricity grid is hit and everything like that, I promise you, with 100% fucking certainty, okay, this is how much I promise you, that most of the people that you say, oh, have morals and have all the rest of this stuff, would be doing the most immoral shit that you can possibly understand. Because
we can actually see that when we look back at in history, when we're talking about the Nazis. You can actually see that in the stories from World War II, from the actual Nazi regime. There was members of the army and things who weren't part of the party, weren't part of the Nazi party, but they committed atrocities.
Yeah,
but afterwards they said that they felt sick from the actions that they were actually carrying out. At the time they didn't, but afterwards they did. And so their morals, if we want to call it morals, changed because they were allowed to within the system that they were in, with so the ethics allowed them to, in that sense.
As I said, morals are internal. Nobody can give you your morals and all. That is just who you are.
Yeah, but their morals changed because the Nazi Party allowed it, changed the morals for them. So they thought that what they were doing, the atrocities that they were committing, was correct. It wasn't until later on, after they were caught, that they changed their morals again back to what they had originally before the war started.
Now their behavior they thought was ethical at the time, but then they later figured out it was wrong. But the morals are internal. Your morals are you, not your behavior. Ethics are your behavior.
But hold on, Alive. The number one thing is that people's morals constantly change. Like, nobody has a set moral that they couldn't say afterwards, hey, I changed that because I didn't think that this was right and was internally correct for me to think of. It's the same as I think as people who are religious. People who are religious and very conservative, their morals, once they become non-religious, completely and absolutely change. So that's what I'm saying. Morals, yes, they are eternal, but they change. It's not like there's some sort of structure that is non-changeable.
Their behavior changes. Their ethics change. The thing
right.
is,
I was going to ask.
Hold on. Hey, no. Hold on a second. I don't mean to interrupt, but all right. Psychopaths. There are many psychopaths living amongst us. Okay, they cannot change and all, but they live and they function in society perfectly fine. There are a lot of them. Okay, but that is because they chose to have ethical behavior.
No. Then the number one thing, and I think
that doesn't marry with what we're taught within the field of like criminology and things like that, especially with like well, any of the fields within psychology. That's not what we're taught at all.
They chose not to go against their internal morals. Their internal morals say rape, kill, whatever the hell it is, bad things that tell them inside, but they had enough ethics and they chose to live by that.
They have a different perspective of things, but we wouldn't within psychology, we wouldn't actually call that like a choice or anything like that, or a set of morals that they have or anything. That's not at all.
They are immoral people, but they have ethical behavior.
Is it logically possible to choose your morals and still know that your moral is immoral? Like can somebody, like, let's say morals are objective thing like gravity. Can people be wrong about gravity? Like, can people say gravity doesn't exist, but it's more like angels pushing people down to the earth and keeping them there? Or something's, any other explanation, regardless of how ridiculous it might sound, right?
They
could, right? So I think I was just trying to establish that if, ethics are sort of like this objective thing in the world, then then if that was the case, then that would be consistent. The fact that some people can change their morals at the drop of a hat, because anybody can change their idea of gravity at the drop of a hat.
No,
possibly,
but the number one thing that I'm trying to say is that it's not based on dropping the morals on a drop of a hat, right? Like, you've been religious before, I've been religious before. And the number one thing is that the morals that are within that said religion guide us towards certain views of thought, right? Mm-hmm. However, once we leave those religions, we reform our morals. It's not we're reforming our ethics, we're reforming our morals. And through reforming our morals, our ethics change because we're interacting with the world in a different way. Because our morals have changed within us for us to engage ethically and differently with those individuals. So that's why what I'm trying to talk to Alive with is that he's saying, well, the morals are within us. We're in complete agreement. The thing that we're not in complete agreement with is that, at least what it makes me feel, what he's saying is that morals are this unchangeable thing. They're something that are like objective, but it's ethics which have some sort of subjectivity to them. And I'm saying, no, that is completely and absolutely wrong.
Right.
It is the morals and the ethics that can change over time. It's just that I'm not sure if that's why in our conversation tomorrow, I'm going to bring up why spirituality cannot coexist with atheism or secularism, because of these what I'm about to say is that theology and spiritualism are relatively the same. There are a few distinctions, but they're relatively the same based on the ideas and the conceptions of which they have.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. They come from the same place. Both of them come. So just like you were saying, you're using that as a metaphor or an analogy. So if spirituality, religion, all of that stuff can come from a common place, then so can morals and ethics. Can come from a common place that can change, and it can be plastic, and it can
that's why I'm a Herculean in a certain sense, because Hercules was the one that said everything changes in due time. All you just need is time for things to change. And likewise with morals, likewise with ethics, likewise with the way that we look over time through aging, everything like that, it all changes. Everything changes over time because we get nouveau information that comes to us and we realize that they have a hindrance within or with our morals. And from that, we change our morals.
Perhaps the way to decode what's going on is to try to find out what properties stay the same. What qualities stay the same.
That's where I wanted to barge Herrera.
Yeah.
I wasn't even on earlier, but he was like, no, I'm not the same person that I was when I was 10 years old. It's like, yeah, actually you are. You just behave differently. You're the same moral individual that you are. You just tend to behave different. Your ethics change. And that's the same thing like with Josh. Your ethics will change over time and they will adapt to particular environments.
Yeah, but likewise with the morals as well. My number one thing that I would want to ask is that what are the particular morals, or at least the morals that we have, are built from society. And my number one thing is that if you were out in the wilderness, let's just say, and it was post-apocalyptic, whatever world, let's just say, or dystopic world that we lived in, are you going to tell me the first human that you're going to walk up to, you're going to be like, hey buddy, how are you doing? I just wanted to act morally to you and everything like that. No, you would act with suspicion. You'd be like, holy fuck, who is this person? Okay, let me stay behind this rock here. Let me get my sights on this person and see if he's going to do anything wrong. Okay, I'll make a close approach. And then all of a sudden when you see something bad, are you going to second guess yourself when you pull the trigger? No.
Speaking so that's as what I'm person saying. Who's played all the Fallout.
Yeah, Kathy made a great example, of about like who she was. Okay. We don't need to talk about the transition and what other stuff, but that's who she was internally. Okay. And the thing is morals are nothing more than internal. Like Josh, it's what yourself is. Okay, you can adapt to different situations and all, but you can act differently from person you are. I act differently in front of my grandmother than I do with you guys. So but that's just ethical behavior right there. But morally, we all are programmed the way we are, good, bad, evil, or righteous, as the Christians would say. But that's what it is. And that's where the water gets a little muddy and all this, because our actions and all do not show the person, inside. Our morals are who we are inside. I think it's moral to go over and pistol whip that fat woman next door that can't change a battery in the damn smoke detector. But my ethical behavior,
I think the point that
says don't do it. And I could go and do a genocide and all that. The Nazis did not have any ethics. They acted on their morals.
Right, but the number one thing that I'm trying to say is that the morals in and of themselves, right? Because the one thing is that society perpetuated that thought process. And henceforth, what I'm saying is within the Nazi regime, right? Society perpetuated a thought process that individuals thought was morally correct. And they acted out based on those said ethics onto the enemy populations, right? But the one thing is that afterwards, when they looked at the amount of devastation that they caused and everything like that, their morals changed. That's why if you look at the normal German citizen after World War II, what did they say? I'm ashamed. They spray painted on buildings and everything like that of their shame for what had happened in Germany at that particular time and the things that they allowed to happen within Germany itself. Now, that's what I'm saying. We're both in agreement. We both agree that morals are on the inside, ethics are on the outside. But for me to state that morals can't be changed, I think that is absolutely asinine.
Yeah, and you compare it to what I was talking earlier about, like sort of the internalized part of myself being trans and stuff. That can actually be proven on as unchangeable on brain scans. But we can't prove, we haven't been able to prove until this point that that morals are like inherent to us and are unchangeable in any sense through like sort of like a biological part of ourselves or anything. We haven't been able to prove that. Before I would say, well, the two are the same and that the morals are unchangeable in that sense. I would have to I would have to see some actual evidence of this from a neurobiological sense.
Is it hurting anybody for you to be you?
Pardon, say that again?
Oh, Mike probably got buried again. Is it hurting anybody for you to be you?
For me to be me?
Does it hurt anybody?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, there's some people who argue that it is, but it shouldn't be.
Is it no? Not their selfish, wants and needs. Is it hurting them?
No, essentially, no. It's not hurting
No.
anybody else. It's not affecting anybody else.
So you're doing an ethical behavior, being
yes.
You. There's a big differentiation between Nazis killing a bunch of people for their selfish needs, and just letting people be themselves. Okay, I don't have time to get into that.
I think you missed the point of what I was saying, though. Like the point I was trying to make is that the like who I am is inherent to me, but morality itself is not inherent to me. I've got proof that me being trans is, I can show on a brain scan that I am different to biological male. Like that particular part of my biology is different, but I can't show on a brain scan that my sense of morality is somehow inherent and unchangeable.
Of course, it's a different yardstick. Well, it's technically the wrong yardstick. You're getting into like something
materialism, yeah.
Yes, but we can show that morality, that the decision to make a certain, based upon a moral outcome or something, we can show that is that's happening in the brain. We can watch that happen in the brain, but we can't show that it's inherent to like the brain, that particular position is inherent and unchangeable. Like you could. You could do the same test the next year, and it could be a completely different outcome, like the decision that person makes in that particular scenario.
All right, Scott, why don't you, give us a little, see what.
Yeah, it's going to kind of wrap up, the stream here. I got to get ready to book it on up, but I just wanted to say, for me, it's interesting to hear everybody's viewpoint and when they're different. I'm so happy that this forum that that I've created is not an echo chamber at all. Like, I don't think anyone here has disrespected anybody or made a big deal about things they probably shouldn't. We just have different views and opinions, and we're expressing them and challenging them, and I think that's a healthy thing, and it's a great thing. This is what I love to do. But yeah, I wanted to go ahead and close down the stream. But tomorrow, Josh and I are going to be on the Atheist Uprising. What time is that going to be, Josh?
It's going to be at around 8 o'clock. And so it's going to be 8. We're going to start that at 8. And
Eastern time?
Eastern time.
Eastern time. Okay, 8 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good good thing because, Josh, on his last show, he mentioned that, the one point that I got out of it was that, he said that spirituality and faith, but, my key trigger was the spirituality part, was not consistent with skepticism. And my whole thing is, I think it can be, and we're just going to discuss that. So I made a little reaction video to kind of lay out my view. And now we're going to discuss each other's view. We kind of have a chance to criticize each other and, challenge it. Again, no echo chambers here.
No echo chambers. Even within the show that I had, I'm like, I don't want an echo chamber. If you disagree with me, come and freaking speak.
Right.
We have a conversation. We'll go back and forth.
Nice. And Scott, I'll catch up with you. I know you're
man.
Changed on the Facebook.
Yeah.
I think you're in the psychological group, so I'll try to find you there and fire you a message.
Okay.
All right.
Cool, man. Thank you so much for jumping in, man. I appreciate that.
And Kathy, hey, it was a pleasure talking to you. And I'll
you too.
very pleasant conversation. And Josh, even though we disagree on some things, fist bump.
Big time, big
All
time.
right.
That's my number one thing. Yeah, I take a controversial approach to certain things, but I always love when people push back.
Cool, man. Hey, y'all have a good evening.
All right. Bye-bye.
Nice meeting you.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and end the stream here. But, man, if you like what we're doing, now I'm asking you guys, you can like and subscribe, and please join the channel, because the more people that actually subscribe, you know, what I'm learning is that I have more people that want to engage, and that's the whole point. You know, this
You
is
know
not
you want to like and subscribe. You're determined to do so.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to put some cues up in the back of my
like, subscribe,
yes, like, subscribe. Yeah.
Little thumbs up with like a fucking subscribe on the left hand corner.
I'm going to determine. I'm going to push your buttons here. Yeah, man. Wonderful conversation, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Katie, for joining. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Yes, indeed. All right. Later on, guys.